So this is where the mass heater is going in. Now there are a few factors that make it a bit more complicated than it should be. If you're just building it straight onto a solid floor, it's really not a big deal, really easy. But here there's a few things that make it a bit more complicated. It's an old house, so there's a few things to deal with there. It's about, well, over 90 years old. The most obvious one is this is a suspended floor. Not by much, there's a couple of feet maybe below the joists, but obviously I can't put something weighing, I don't know, 6-7 ton of, you know, cob, clay and stone and so on straight on top of that. It's just going to be too much for the floor, and it'll move and it'll crack the cob and so on. So what I can do is I could just chalk up underneath the joists and reinforce them, but I'm still not, yeah, there's still the scope for a lot of movement there. If I had no choice I would, but I'm not in that situation. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to lift the whole section of floor, going to cut the joists and take out those, you know, those sections of joist completely, and then I'm going to build a solid concrete foundation that's bigger than the mass by about that much on all sides, all the way around, and that'll support the whole thing. That'll have an insulation layer then before the mass goes on top of it, but you know, we'll worry about that when we get there. So that's the first and obvious one. Another one is this fire. It's an old fireplace, it's been around a really long time. It's an old knackered back boiler, it barely works, it doesn't keep us warm. So that's just going to have to go, which is why we're going with the mass heater in the first place. But of course it's also connected to a pump, which is switched here. So there's electrics involved as well in it, and also of course there's a lot of plumbing because it's got a back boiler for the hot water system. So I've got to play around with the plumbing and the electrics, and also this stud partition wall, this section, all this material is getting swapped out. So these electrics, they're going to be basically in the mass itself, or would be. So all those electrics need to be moved as well. So I'll just keep it simple, I'll just shorten them to keep them up at my working height. But this plasterboard, this has to come off to expose the stud work and the plasterboard on the other side. Now the other side of this wall is the bathroom, which is, you know, it's really nice to have a heated bathroom, and it's freezing in our bathroom because the heating system barely works. So yeah, in winter the bathroom's just cold. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a really attractive back face onto the mass that runs through here, and then we'll cut through the plasterboard on the other side of this stud work, and we'll have some of that stone exposed, and that'll of course be able to radiate heat into the bathroom itself, and it'll be lovely. You know, we'll actually have a warm bathroom for the first time ever. So yeah, there's a few things to worry about, especially with these sockets here, because I can see cable running across. Now the socket's opposite that on the exterior wall, and I don't know whether power runs to these sockets from there or whether it runs to those from these. So we'll have to see what we find when I got the floor up. But yeah, first things first, I've got to lift the floor, and before that I've got to take out the plasterboard. Right, I'll get going. So that is all the panelling down, and that's the floor up. So you can see it's quite a void, pretty disgusting. So I've got a couple of things to do. I need to sweep and scrape all of that out, so I've got something reasonably pleasant to be standing on. I've taken out this one board here because that wasn't doing a great deal. So yeah, that's done, but I can't take the others out just yet, because even though you can see there's the remnants of a supporting wall there, it's back a good 2 feet from this edge here. So I'm going to build the wall up as I go. So I'll take some of these out and I'll leave 2, maybe 3 of them in place, just to give it a certain amount of support. And yeah, I'll get the wall built underneath that, then I can support it, then I can take the other beams out, and yeah, I'll have a nice easy area to work in. I can see what I'm doing with the electrics now. Now, I'm not an electrician, but I think I've worked out what's going. So that cable there runs out to the pump. That needs to just go, because I can actually disconnect that at that end. I can actually reach under. So that is the override pump switch, so I can put it on manually. All of that cabling can be stripped out, and I just need to blank off from here. And that's the section that comes from the hot water tank. So yeah, that's pretty straightforward even there. So I can deal with that. I can strip all of that out as far as it goes, and that'll all go. 2 cables go to there. A coming across to here, and that's just how it ties in to the ring main. So that's pretty straightforward. I can take the cables from there, just connect them together, and I can secure that back under here where it's good and safe. And then there's these cables here, which same thing, different main, but they go up to those two sockets there. So I can just take those sockets out, again connect those together with proper equipment. It's not being roughing it up. I'm doing it properly, nice and safe. And that'll go eventually, once I've got the mass heater built, I'll lift some of these boards and I'll route that cabling around outside the mass heater, and they'll come up onto this wall here, and they'll be, because the mass will come out to here, so I can actually go for surface mounted. I like recessed sockets mostly, but that's solid wood. I'll be there forever and it won't look pretty. So I'm going to surface mount them because they're not going to be prone to anything, and I won't use a horrible plastic buttress. I'll have a nice wooden box or something. So that'll work quite nicely there. So we'll have sockets available for running cable out, because obviously there'll be a bench here, be a coffee table in front, and for running computers and charging phones and stuff. They'll be nicely out of the way. So yeah, first things first is to get the electrics done. After that, assuming all that works okay, I'm going to sweep this out, as I've said, and then I'll start rebuilding the block wall. You can see on this side, that's pretty good, and that's a nice support wall that's just to support the floor joists. So that's good and strong, but there are holes in it because obviously there's ventilation underneath to keep the floor from rotting out. So even though we're going to be blocking this section in completely, there's still space around that side and around the other side. This void runs under the whole house, so it's not going to make a huge difference. And the one thing I've got to do is I've got to put plastic over these holes here, or something to block these holes. Otherwise, of course, by the time I've blocked it in to make a nice outline, and then I pour concrete into here, that's just going to run out and fill the rest of the void, and I don't want that. But this house doesn't have a damp proof course, and you can see here under this wooden header board that runs under the joists, there's, where is it? There we go. There's a nice membrane. It's an old bitumen based one, I think. So that's where the membrane is. So when it's damp, this wall here could potentially wick moisture upwards, and I don't want that getting into the foundation and then up into the mass itself. It shouldn't get too bad because obviously it's a heated thing, it'll be constantly driving off moisture, but I still want to minimise that if I can. So I'm going to put down a damp proof membrane if I can find it, otherwise I'll have to improvise something that'll cover this wall and protect it, just to give that separation between this wall and the foundation that I'm going to pour. And also it needs to be done underneath it. As you can see, there's quite a bit of damp down there. The dirt on the ground isn't helping, it's going to be hanging onto it, but anyway. And also this really dodgy foundation that someone's built that's just for this hearth here, where the hearth was before I took it out. But you can see down in there, the original section of brickwork, the blockwork's quite nice. So yeah, that answers that. So yeah, this section here has been added more recently and it looks terrible. But I'm still going to keep it there, I'm still going to use it because it's going to have cement poured all the way around it. So it's going to be locked in place. It definitely won't go anywhere, and it will definitely be strong enough for supporting the weight of the mass and the burn chamber that will be up here. So yeah, hopefully I've got to get that done today because tomorrow's pouring down, and I'd like to have got all this block work in so that can be curing while it's raining tomorrow, and I can crack on with a few other jobs, and that gives me the day after then is meant to be pretty good weather, so I should be able to get a single concrete pour done and get this whole void filled with a whole lot of rubble and a lot of concrete. So right, first things first, let's do the wiring. I finished the retaining wall yesterday. You can see it's really not pretty, but it doesn't need to be. All it has to do is contain the concrete when it's poured. But because we're well into autumn, things are pretty cold. Yeah, it's just not setting as well as I'd like. It's still pretty crumbly. I can still feel it's damp to the touch. You can see the very little bits that dropped off as I was doing cementing. They've started to turn that light grey, but the rest of it is still pretty dark, so it's just not drying. So don't forget this, with it being on a damp-proof membrane, it's not wicking moisture down into the ground or anything at all like that, it's just evaporating off into the house. So yeah, it's pretty limited. So what I've done after, well actually the best part of 2 days some of this has been built. So I've got a fan blowing onto it, and I'll move that around just to keep the air circulating and just blow the air over it. And I've set up an industrial dehumidifier, which is the noise you can hear. It's pretty good. We've had it for years, it works really well. And yeah, we're running that in here, so as that fan, and that, well, it's a fan heater, but it's not set to heat, it's just there to blow air. We'll keep the air blowing over it and wick that moisture away, and this will strip it out of the air and dump it into that bucket. It's a surprising amount of water that come out of there, so we've got it all set up to max, it's all cranking, and yeah, hopefully by this time tomorrow it should have started to dry out a little bit. So you can even see on the block itself, see, it's just starting to turn that light shade of grey on the very ridges of it in a few places. Up till yesterday that was all very, very, very dark grey, because these blocks have been outside, they've absorbed a lot of moisture, and it's just not curing. Like you can see there, it's just starting to dry off. So yeah, we'll keep this running today, and hopefully that will have cured within, well, hopefully by tomorrow. Today's Wednesday, we've got a weather window on Friday if we're doing the main concrete pour, and that's when I want to do it. I'll move a little, I'll mix a bit of cement inside the house in a wheelbarrow. I'm prepared to do that, but I'm not going to mix the amount of concrete necessary to fill this void by hand. I'll be here for days. So yeah, hopefully that should make a difference. So we'll see. Well, that seems to have worked. You can see just down on the back wall there, it's started to go off. It's not completely cured, it won't be for a little while yet, but yeah, that's really started to dry off. So today we're doing a concrete pour. Now you can see in a few places I've done a little bit of like buttressing inside, so that as this thing fills up with concrete, and we're only going up to about halfway today I think, that weight of that wet concrete isn't going to push over that end wall. And I've done the same thing over here, because that wall there of course is pretty unsupported. It's not keyed in either side, because obviously I had to use the membrane, so effectively it was a freestanding wall on top of a membrane, so you could have just shoved it over, so having a lot of weight of concrete behind it could have been a bit too much. So today, well yesterday, I did this section here that you can see, and what I've done is I've got recycled breeze block, concrete block from a derelict garage which is next to the house. That's going to have to get rebuilt at some point, but it had enough. So rather than just send the whole lot off to landfill, we're using it as ballast in here. So what I'll do is, I've done it already here, so that when I do the rest of the concreting across all this section today, there'll be no weight at all pressing on that wall. There'll be no pressure in that direction that could send it over. And then tomorrow, probably maybe the day after, we'll complete the pour and bring it up to just below the level of these joists we've cut here. That's about as high as we want to go. So yeah, this really rough wall will work perfectly well, because really it's mostly full of old rubble. So what I'll do is I'll put more of that in right across the whole base here, and then we'll just pour concrete just to fill in the gaps and tie it all together. And by the time we've done that on a second layer, that's going to be a really solid foundation for building the mass heater on top of. And of course it's tied in to the foundation for the chimney that projects out quite a ways, so it's sitting on top of that. And then there's all along here, there's this foundation wall here, that's proper, got a really good strong foundation on. So again, we're sitting on top of that lip, so that'll give it even more reinforcement. And actually the entire floor is concreted. We just don't know how deep. It's probably not particularly deep, but yeah, it's impossible to tell without digging it up, and I'm not going to do that. So it's plenty strong enough underneath all of that, and with the membrane in place we won't have any moisture wicking up through it and causing problems for the mass, which there are ways around. You can build a simple stone foundation and, you know, have that slight separation. But yeah, I'd rather just have the entire mass below it, you know, protected from the damp. And yeah, so next thing's next, I've got to get the block down. So another day, I've got all the concrete poured, that's all nice and good. I had thought I'd just take the half pour out and it'd all be nice and good, and it's not at all. You'll see that was poured on top of really bad rubble. So I'm going to have to take a certain amount of this out and then do another concrete pour here. But what's concerning me more is I've got to take the back boiler out, and this side's reasonably secure, but on this side, yeah, to take these bricks out, which I need to access the plumbing, you can see that it will leave just a very small amount. The only thing that is supporting the chimney breast at that point is this block here that's already been carved, and there's this excuse for a lintel that's just a bit of angle iron that's been embedded in the wall. It's really not strong at all, and I'm very concerned that if I carry on, I'm going to bring the whole chimney breast down. So what I'm going to do instead is, you can see there's a big void behind there, and you can even see the size of the hole that was made just to bring the plumbing in. So there's another pipe lower down, so there's two large pipes have made big holes in that side of the chimney. There's another two have happened here on that plumbing, and even here where there's been previous builds, you can see there's a hole been made there and another one here, and they're just the ones I know about. So there's very little original block left. So much as I really like to get this horrible thing out, I'm just not going to risk it, because I could risk bringing down the entire chimney breast. It's really not good. I mean, you can see, yeah, what used to be an excuse for a lintel above it, and there's cracks and so on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour concrete into that void there and fill that whole thing up as high as I can, get as much concrete into it as I can, and then I'm going to cement this closed again and get as much support as I can back into this column. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to brick it up to about here, pour concrete behind, then brick it up the rest of the way. Then I'll brick up, I mean, I've got to do, as well as this concrete pour here, I've also got to do support there, because underneath that again has just been done with stone. So that needs to be filled, and then I'll make it as neat as I can here, and I'll brick up this front facade as well up to as high as I can. I'll render the whole lot so it looks reasonably secure, and when I bring the pipe in to the chimney breast here, it's going to be a really long, tedious job. But I'll rig something up and I'll pour concrete down inside that as well to try and completely fill this section down here. So the bottom, say 2-3 feet, will be the back boiler embedded in as much concrete as I can get in there and create as much support as I possibly can. So I'm going to make a start on that today, because I'm really not at all happy with the stability of that. So that's the real, that's the reality of working on a 1930s house. It's yeah, everything's been bodged, nothing's been done well. But normally you wouldn't leave a back boiler in, because of the nature of it, it can be a sealed box in the back full of water, and if you connect a normal heating system into the front of that again, that can explode, because obviously water expands hundreds of times to its volume when it boils into vapor. So that's incredibly dangerous. But we're going to be disconnecting these pipes here, and we're going to do the same the other side of that chimney breast that's in the hot water tank that's in the bathroom. So it'll be completely disconnected. Those pipes will be left open, so if there is any residual water in the pipes, first off we'll blow it out with compressed air so we get as much as we can out. The rest of it will just evaporate off over time. And if it did, by any reason, get too hot in the back there, there's no possibility of explosion because everything's still open. So that's the safest option, and much as I really don't want to do it, it's going to be a really fiddly job. I've got to do a lot more cement and a lot more concrete. Right, let's get going. That is the foundation finally done. You can see the fireplace is all sealed up. Of course the fire is all still in there, like I just said. It'll all need to be disconnected, the plumbing will need taken out, but the fire itself will stay in there. But that's all filled. I've made a mark here of where the chimney goes up when I was able to see up the chimney. So as I break into this here to take the flue later on, I'll get a very liquid amount of very liquid mix of concrete, and I'll pour some of that down the chimney so that it will fill all of the heat exchanger and so on in the fire itself. So up to about here it will be completely solid concrete. And there's pretty big voids back in here that have been packed with concrete. I was out stick, I was ramming it in, and it took ages. But now this entire chimney breast, by the time I'm finished, will be solid concrete up to here, because you can see it's cracking here and it's cracking here. Now that might just be in the plaster, but I don't know. So yeah, I wasn't messing about, I wasn't taking any chances with this, because it's one of the main structural parts of the house itself. I didn't want to risk anything with this chimney. So we've come up with a workaround that should work. So that's all the prep done. And so I've poured the concrete foundation that's a good size. I've moved the electrics that needed to be shifted because they were in the way. I've completely encapsulated the fireplace, so that's no longer in use. And I've taken sections of wall off that need to come off. There's still a bit of prep to be done down this end, but I think we're pretty much good to go on starting work on the mass heater itself, the actual core of it, the burning bit. Yesterday I poured or laid a very shallow, very thin, like a 4-inch retaining wall just around to about here, because this is where we're going to put the insulation down that goes under the core itself. And it's lower, it's about 2 to 3 inches around the rest of it, because we'll use the same insulation down on that under the bench itself. But it needs to be thicker here, because basically we'll be taking the concrete from the core of the mass heater itself, which is the actual J-tube, which is interesting, because it'll actually damage concrete. That's the kind of heat I like. So yeah, that's the next step, but this video is long enough, so we'll put that in the next video. Hopefully the quail will be out of the room by then as well, because they just constantly make noise when I'm trying to film. So yeah, that's the end of the prep done. That is the foundation finally done. You can see the fireplace is all sealed up. Of course the fire is all still in there, like I just said. It'll all need to be disconnected, the plumbing will need taken out, but the fire itself will stay in there. But that's all filled. I've made a mark here of where the chimney goes up when I was able to see up the chimney. So as I break into this here to take the flue later on, I'll get a very liquid amount of very liquid mix of concrete, and I'll pour some of that down the chimney so that it will fill all of the heat exchanger and so on in the fire itself. So up to about here it will be completely solid concrete. And there's pretty big voids back in here that have been packed with concrete. I was out stick, I was ramming it in, and it took ages. But now this entire chimney breast, by the time I'm finished, will be solid concrete up to here, because you can see it's cracking here and it's cracking here. Now that might just be in the plaster, but I don't know. So yeah, I wasn't messing about, I wasn't taking any chances with this, because it's one of the main structural parts of the house itself. I didn't want to risk anything with this chimney. So we've come up with a workaround that should work. Now the other thing I did yesterday was I laid a very low wall all the way around the edge. Then it jogs in slightly here, but all the way around. And that will contain the next step, and that's what I'm doing today. So I'm going to get a lot of perlite, I'm going to mix that with clay slip just to stabilise it to just the right mix. And then I'm going to pack that in pretty much up to that level, and I'm only going to come up to that as far as here, because this is where the bench is going to go, which isn't going in just yet. I need to do a little bit of work here. It'll be easier to do. Oh, the quail making all sorts of noise. Yeah, so I'm going to bring the perlite out about as far as here. It really won't damage it any from being in two steps, and that then means I can start going on building the combustion unit and the heat riser. And that's very cool. So I'm hoping to get onto that today, but we'll see how I get on with the perlite first. Yeah, very cool, because with the combustion unit in place and the heat riser built, then I can build the manifold, and really at that point, with the manifold in place, I can fit the ducting coming out from here all the way around, back up. I can put the vertical in, I can go straight to the chimney breast. Now I don't know, there might be another piece of ducting that I need to buy, but it's expensive stuff. I didn't want to buy it unnecessarily, but I might well have to get another 90-degree piece. If I do, it'll just slow me up a couple of days while it arrives. because obviously living where we do, a lot of stuff has to, well, everything like that has to come in from quite a way away with the post. And at that point, even without the mast built, because I'll be using really good seals on all the ducting, I could actually run the thing, and that is key because we're getting pretty cool now. We're down to about 3 to 6 degrees at night, and obviously I've sealed that up, and half of the bits that came off it are in the garden. So at this point I've committed to the mass heater for this winter, which is simultaneously reassuring and terrifying. So right, I'm going to get on with this perlite. So I dug some clay soil out of the ground. This is subsoil. It's virtually completely solid clay. There's not much silt in it. It's pretty good stuff. So I put a shovel or two of that in the cement mixer, which makes a huge amount of noise. There's a certain amount of stone in it, and it makes huge amounts of sound. We mix it. I add water from the hose pipe until it starts liquefying, and once it starts splashing out, I know there's plenty of liquid in there. So what I do then is I tip the cement mixer through a little bit at a time through the screen into the bucket, and you can see all the stones get stuck in the screen, and what comes out is this beautiful stuff. It's like liquid chocolate. When the bucket gets full, I run that bucket, pour it again through the same screen into the bucket. You can see what I'm building up there, and that's actually thicker than I need it for this. And when the bucket gets full, I dump it into this wheelie bin here, which I've just scrubbed clean so there's nothing unpleasant in it. It's not a horrible job. It's easier to do this when it's raining and there's showers coming through than it is when you're using, you know, cement-based mortars. So yeah, I'm going to keep going with this basically until I've gone through all of this subsoil and I've got as much clay slip as I can. Now this, let me show you, is pretty thick stuff. So if I put that on my fingers, you can see that really sticks. It's amazing stuff. So that's actually slightly thicker than I need it. So what I can do is I can water this down with a bit more water and get it to the exact consistency that I want for adding to the perlite. But the perlite, really, I think I'm going to have to do inside because the wind's up and I've got perlite everywhere. And I've only got, what, 300 litres, I think? 3,000? I don't know, a load. So, yeah, I'm going to keep going with that until we're good to go. So this is the insulation that we're putting underneath the firebox. It's clay stabilised perlite, so it's the clay slip that I produced yesterday, and it's watered down to the point that it'll just about cover your fingerprints so you can't see it. So it's fairly watery, but you know, it's easy on that basis to you know, get it to the right consistency. Then that's added to perlite, you know, the white fluffy stuff that you get from, you know, for making potting mixes and stuff in the garden, and it's mixed together until a lump of it compressed together holds its own weight, but when you press it, crumples. That's what we're after, or pops apart even better. But yeah, so you don't want to put too much in, you don't want too little. So I'm putting that on and I'm just spreading it out to get it nice and level. I'm not tamping it down, we want the air spaces in there, but yeah, it's coming together. This is about a bag and a third, so that's what, about 130 odd litres, 135 litres. It's, you know, it goes a fair way. We've got a bit more of it. I think I'll have to order some more before I've done this job. But yeah, that's the insulation layer going down. So that's the base pad for the burn unit in. That was stressful. The insulation in all over the internet, I kept reading you need, you know, 4 inches of clay perlite insulation, including on websites that I actually, you know, consider to be, you know, accurate. But it turns out that when I eventually found the right section in the book again, being this book, it's 2 inches of clay stabilised perlite needed for insulation underneath, and that really, you know, dropped it down another 2 inches, and that's key for what we're doing, as well as saving a lot of perlite. So yeah, I've dug all that out, down to 2 inches, about 2.5 inches, nice flat and level. I got the bricks into place. That was difficult because you put them onto the uncompacted perlite, but you know, levelled, and then you tap down the high bricks and you go around, and I was chasing the level all over because you got it level in that direction, and then it was, you know, on the twist that way, so you tap these bits down, and yeah, I chased it all over. But now finally it took about an hour and a half maybe, which I suppose isn't too bad, and got it all flat and level. But at that point I realised that the higher section of lip that I'd put along here was maybe, I don't know, half an inch to an inch of insulation between these bricks and that, and of course that, it would have been the concrete, and that of course was contacting the ends of the stubs of the beams. So yeah, we would have had incredibly hot temperatures from the firebox transmitting through, you know, transferring through that little lip of cement and across, and that would have caused a problem. We'd have had, you know, possible fires and all sorts. And the same thing was true to a lesser degree, but down this side. So what I've done is, with all the pads still in place, very, very carefully, I chiselled it out. It was relatively fresh, so it came up. There was a nice shear plane between the two pores. So I've pulled the little lip out completely from this direction. All of this now is tamped perlite that goes up against the wall that already existed, and I put a slight ramp on it just so it's still nicely compacted. The next job will be to come in with a little tiny bit of concrete mortar and put a little tiny lip all the way around it just to hold all these bricks in place. I've given a very minimal tamp around it just to, you know, settle it slightly so I'm not going to have any settling. And this section here and down the edge there is going to be very little, but it will still work, and it'll still give me that separation between the base pad, which will get incredibly hot, and, you know, the cement that's attached to it, of course, and the wood beyond it. And because that'll be a minimal one, I'll get some more of this rock wool that came up from under here anyway when I lifted the boards up for, you know, putting the foundation in. I'll jam some more of that down between as well, so it'll be, you know, double insulated, and yeah, that'll make a big difference. So yeah, that was a lot more stressful than I anticipated, but it's down and it's flat and it's level and it's square. So with that little cement border in place, then I'm into starting to actually lay fire brick and start to build the firebox itself, which I'm simultaneously anxious about, and it'll be nice to get going. You know, this is a massive job considering I'm not a builder or anything at all like that, so yeah. So with the base for the burn unit in and all surrounded, I've laid out the brick as indicated in the book, and I've run into one issue. Now, this is an amazing book. I wouldn't recommend that you try to build one of these without buying this book. It's fantastic, but most of it is about building an 8-inch system, and this, you know, with 8-inch ducting. This is a smaller one for various reasons. We've gone with a 6-inch system, which is the other fairly conventional rocket mass system, and there's a lot less detail in terms of you know, laying out a 6-inch system than an 8-inch system, which causes a few minor issues. But the problem is actually one of mine. Normally, all the instructions in this are for full fire brick, which is this size, and a split brick, which is just half as thick, and it's like a standardized fire brick that they use for the examples in the book. And I don't know whether, well, I'm pretty sure that I've ordered the wrong ones basically, because I ordered what I thought I was ordering, split brick, and you can see that's less than half the thickness. So a normal split brick should be 1 1/4 inches thick. This is just 1 inch thick. So the proportions of bricks and how they stack up doesn't work with this example. But there are principles to be borne in mind. You could build one of these to, you know, as long as it's wide enough to get your hand down into for cleaning, you could make one of these in virtually any size with certain modifications. It doesn't have to be nice round numbers like 6 and 8 inches, just that's the size the ducts come in usually. So one of the problems I've encountered is, because there's a split brick on its side and then a full brick on edge to bring us up to what would be the normal height, except of course I'm 1/4 of an inch too low because this level here isn't high enough. Now that causes a problem because the cross-sectional area through the burn, down the feed chute, through the burn tunnel and up the riser, and then we ignore the area around the bell, around the drum, but as it goes down through the manifold and through the ducting, again it's the same cross-sectional area of that 6-inch duct as there is through the masonry channel through this whole section. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that this is 6 inch, because you've got the difference between the cross-sectional area of a 6-inch duct is not 6 inches on all sides through a square opening. It's different. And because this is made for the American market, this book, it's all in imperial, so that breaks down as 5 1/4 by 5 3/4 inches, which, you know, normally works, and I was quite happy working to that, absolutely fine. But because I can't get the height on it, it means I've had to widen it slightly to get that cross-sectional area. So at that point, I've abandoned imperial and I've gone straight to metric. It's just easier, I think better in metric. Now, a 6-inch duct is 150 millimeters, 15 centimeters, and the way that breaks down is because this brick, you know, this section of tunnel down in there is exactly 14 centimeters high. I've had to spread it slightly to the sides, and this now becomes a 16 centimeter opening. Now, the trouble with that is that we also need a 14 by 16 centimeter opening coming up here through the burn feed, and also up through the riser. You know, there has to be a completely identical cross-sectional area through the whole system, and that means, of course, that this section here has to be a slightly different dimension as well. But I've been very lucky in that normally it takes, what's that, 3, 4, 5 full fire bricks to create the bridge through, you know, down through the burn tunnel. But I'm very lucky in that all I had to do is swap out one of the full-size bricks for 2 of the not quite split bricks, the ones that are an inch thick, and it actually turns out absolutely perfect. So the layout here now is I've got an opening that's 14 centimeters by 16 centimeters, and exactly the same here. That's 14 centimeters and 16 centimeters, and that's the exact same proportion that'll come up as we go up. So that's the difficult bit. Once I got this section in, I'll be going with another one here, because what we worry about is the interior dimensions. We don't care what's happening on the outside, so a little bit of overhang like this really doesn't matter at all. I could trim them off if I wanted to be pretty, but it doesn't matter. And then the next one will go there. You see, all that lines up quite nicely, but I've got to make a cut brick here, and I'll have to do another one here, which will be, you know, the opposite, so that we're staggering the joins like you would building a brick wall. And with that in place, I can put the next one on. Another problem I've encountered is, theoretically, fire brick is dimensionally completely perfect. They should be square, they should be exactly the same, and these aren't. There are slight variations. If I put 2 of them next to each other on a perfectly flat surface, one of them will sometimes stick up by as much as a millimetre, which, when you're talking something like this, really counts, because they should be able to stack, and that'll be it. So it does cause issues. Now, normally you can get away with, instead of using like a mortar, like a cement, using fire clay slip, which is just fire clay that's mixed in water to make a very thin slurry that's just at the thickness that if you dip your finger into it, it just fills in your fingerprints. So that's perfect, you know. And it's really quite thin, and it's just there as more of a liquid shim than anything else. So as we stack the bricks, it, you know, fills in all the gaps and behaves quite nicely, but it's not like a glue. So the difficulty with that is, compared to a brick wall, you can just tap down, it squeezes a bit out the sides, and you've got, you know, everything flat and level. It won't necessarily be with this, so that's something I've got to bear in mind. I'm going to use it just as clay slip and build it up to this kind of level here, and these ones on as well with the ones that are being cut, and then I'll see what sort of level I'm dealing with. If there's any irregularities, then at this point, because of course this is going to come all the way up to 4 feet, you know, it's a big riser, and it's only built with, well, once we get up one more level, it's only built with these on edge. You know, it doesn't give you a great deal to work with in terms of stability. So what I might have to do is, on the bottom, just mix a little bit of sand in with the clay slip, just to create something that's a little bit thicker, so I got a little bit of leveling compound, and I might have to that set up slightly between courses, but we'll see how that goes. It might be okay. The issues I've seen have been with the bigger bricks. It's possible that the thinner ones are more perfect, in which case I'll only have instability in the bottom course, but you know, that I need to address. But we'll see. I just don't know. But yeah, it's very easy to say, and I put this thing together and everything was smooth and everything was perfect. No, I've never built one of these before. I'm not a builder, so I'm showing it, warts and all, including, you know, any issues I encounter. If this is the worst thing I encounter through this build, I'll consider myself quite lucky. But yeah, it is working your way through something from a book is a little bit of, you know, crisis management, hitting one issue after another and, you know, working out how it goes. But yeah, so now I need to take all of this apart, and then I've marked it out on the inside vaguely, and I'll get the first course of bricks, which is, you know, the split bricks, down, get that completely perfect and measure it all out using the clay slip, and then I'll put this course on top. Then I'll put this course back on, measure everything again, make sure everything's right, and then I think I'll switch to making the 2 cut bricks that I need, because once I've come up one more course here, because it's a 6-inch system, there's quite a bit of overhang where the split bricks come up. So you can see that's quite a bit sticking beyond the burn toe. So if I then put the next one on here, well, the next one's going to come kind of here, so even there's overhang. So all of these are going to be cut down to size, which will give me some, you know, end bits that I'm sure I'll use in some project or other. But it will mean that when I come to put the insulation around the around the riser, because all this will be insulated before we're finished, but as I come to do the insulation, it'll be a much neater job, and it'll give me a lot more space through the you know, around the riser as the gases drop down into the manifold. So it'll just give me a lot more room to work with. But yeah, so that's what I'm on to next. So I've just gone to lay the first few bricks, and I've noticed that that black little bump there, that is literally a bump. That is a good 1/3 of a millimetre above the surface. That's enough to create enough instability to cause rocking. So hopefully that's all it is a couple of them. I come across another one here that's got the tiniest little imperfection that again will cause problems. Now these will be fine in the riser, because as long as nothing's butting up against that bit, it won't be a problem, because it'll be cut, or it could just go to the outside, not a problem. So I'm going to keep them and use them for that, but I'm hoping that's what the problem's going to be. Fire brick before it's laid needs wetting, so I've sprayed this lot down with just a basic sprayer, and now I'm about to lay the first brick, which I've been looking forward to and dreading at the same time. So, right, I'm going to get which one of the splits, make sure it's nice and smooth. Now I've laid down here basically the place that it needs to go. Everything from that flows quite nicely, but the first one has to go the right way. So I'll need to dip the brick into water just to get it good and wet, and then the entire bottom face is going to be sticking down on it. So I'm going to dip that into the clay slip, which I've got in this bucket. Oh, that's fine. And then that is going to be dropped there. That's the first brick in place. So far so good. Oh, no, it's not a full size brick. Oh, I see. That edge is now butting up against that, so as well as doing the underside, I also need to dip that side. Yeah, and then I'm going to continue all the way around until I've got this bottom course in and really measured across to make sure that it's, you know, exactly the right 160 millimeters, and then I'll lay the second course up like it was when I did the dry fit earlier. Done. There's a bit more done on the core. The feed tube is up to the height that it is going to be. There's a split brick is going to go on the top, and there'll be about 5 to 10 mil of a slight lip around it just for that to sit on, but that'll all be embedded in the cob that comes around it. I've started building the riser. With even the slightly thinner bricks that I've got means that it makes a really nice thin riser, but it's really scary to build with. You know, I mean, it's 25 mil across 1 inch thick. It's not easy, but you know, so far so good. What I did find when it came time, I mean, if you're doing an 8-inch system, you can leave the stubs sticking out. They're only going to come out a little ways all the way around, so you know it shouldn't make too much of a difference. If you're going for a 6-inch riser like this, then yeah, I wouldn't suggest that. I'd suggest that you get a proper brick cutter and actually cut them off, because it makes it such, you know, so much shorter, and it'll mean insulating it later comes easier. I did discover when it came to cutting these bricks though, theoretically with these things you can use it with an angle grinder and just a cutter and just go nice and slow. I'd say no. If you're doing the volume of this, it's probably going to be it is going to be much easier to get a proper, like a tile cutter. I've kept the safety guards off it and I can just put bricks through, but also these bricks are rough, and because they're going on a metal surface there's a lot of friction on there, so if you're trying to get a smooth cut through the machine it's very difficult. So what I did is I've just cut sheets of plastic, and this is just the damp proof cores, this is the offcuts from what went under the foundation, and just a little bit of that for the brick to sit on, and it glides a lot more easy through the machine. You have to stop and wipe it down every 3 or 4 cuts, because you know the grit builds up underneath it, and again the friction becomes a problem, but that's been a game changer. That was really useful. The next step now is what I have found when it came time for doing this. The slip I was using is fairly thin and watery, and also I found that there's too much grit in it. So this is the fire clay that I've bought. Now what I've been doing for like a sealant for, you know, filling little tiny cracks and stuff, is I put some of that through a sieve, and then I use the finer stuff to make this more like a putty. This is a bit drier than it was, but this is much better. It's a much cleaner thing. There's no bits of grit in it. I can get a much, if you've got bits of grit and you're trying to get an engineered brick to sit perfectly true, then that can give you enough to throw the level off, which is a problem. So I'm going to make basically this kind of slip here, which I've been using all along, but even just doing that I can feel the grit in it. So I'll do that with, in fact I'll do it now. Get my bucket, that one. Okay. Fire clay into the sieve, and then I just sieve it in. You can see all the really coarse stuff stays in the sieve. I mean, it's, you know, a fair bit of coarse. This isn't, you know, a really, you know, fine mesh thing. It's just a standard kitchen sieve. So I'm going to do a fair bit more of that and use that finer product to make the slip for putting up the remaining 6 courses, because 6 courses of this to bring us up to 48 inches, that's scary. I mean, yeah, but it's gonna have to happen. And the other thing I've done today is I've started putting some plaster onto this. Now it's really nice working with just the clay and the earthen masonries that are going into this. I'm a total convert, but I couldn't get that to bond onto this because it'd be a dissimilar material, so I've had to go with you know, multi-finish standard plaster, which I'm a terrible plasterer, but it's going to look better than what's there. So I'm only coming down to about as far as here, because all this is going to be cobbed in to about here anyway. I've got a bit more to do on it, but yeah, just explain away, that's a different colour. Now the other thing with working with the earthen masonries is if you make a mistake, it's so easy to recover from it. At the last time I built the core partially, I was happy with it, I finished for the day, I went to bed for the night, and the next morning when I came out here and started lining things up, things didn't make sense. So it should be 140mm by 160mm, and I made the openings in the core 160 by 160, but through the burn section here it's 140 by 160. So yeah, I'd have had a dissimilar sized core which wouldn't have run at all well. So I'm glad I noticed when I did. I'd only come up a couple of courses, and it would have caused problems. This would have smoked back, it wouldn't have been a good mass heater. So I'm glad I noticed when I did, but because of the, you know, the nature of just using the clay slip and it was still a bit moist, I was able to just, you know, disassemble it really easily. There was no hammering involved, no chiseling, I didn't lose any materials at all. I just remeasured everything as it should have been, wetted the clay down and just put it all back together again with a bit more slip. Really easy. It's easy to, you know, to take it apart and put it back together again, and that's the real perk of using these earthen materials, including, you know, fire clay. It's been absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to continue using that as much as possible in future. So yeah, it's just, yeah, got to build that. But before I do that, I've got all these bricks here, and there's a lot. 6 courses need cutting, and that's, yeah, that's a lot of cutting, so I'm not going to film that, that's not interesting. But I'll do a bit more filming, I think, when I've got the riser finished. So that is the core finished. That's up to 48 inches down inside there, 16 inches down inside there, and from that edge to the interior edge in the bottom there is 23.5 inches. So that is the core completed. Next I need to insulate it and do the manifold, but yeah, I'm going to give that a little bit of time just to dry and set up a bit so I don't, you know, give it a bump when I'm putting the insulation on it. But yeah, that's the next step done. So I've had a bit of heat and a fan onto the riser, so it's set up a little bit. It'll be fairly stable now. It's still, you know, it doesn't completely dry, but that's fine. It'll hold, you know, it'll take a little bit of a knock. But I'm still not going to be, you know, I'm not going to be pushing it. We're going to be work really carefully. But it's time to insulate the riser. Now we're going to insulate the whole firebox as well. The whole lot's going to be covered in insulation. But the riser is the most important bit. This is the section that gets the hottest. So I've got this stuff, which is a ceramic fibre insulation. It's not the cheapest stuff, but it's not horrifically expensive, and it's really good. It's the stuff that they use for covering kilns and things like that to keep the heat in. So I'm going to put a section at the bottom, which will come up to about here probably, wrap that around, and then I'll cut a shorter section and I'll do the top. Now I might not have quite enough of this to do the entire firebox, which is fine, it's not a problem. There's other insulations that'll work, but this is, you know, fairly thin for a huge amount of insulative effect. So specifically I wanted it for the riser, and I knew I'd need probably more than one piece to do it, so I've got two of them here. It's like this 2 meter I think I ordered. So that'll be, actually not sure about that, it's anyway enough to do the riser and a bit. So any gaps left I'll use rock wool insulation that I've got a load of. I'm going to do this in 2 stages. I'm going to wrap the riser first, and I'm going to wrap galvanised wire around it just to hold the whole thing in place, and then I'm going to use a galvanised mesh, like a hardware cloth, around that just to really hold that snugly in place very gently, so that when the barrel's in place later and it comes time for maintenance, I can pop it off, the lid top off the barrel. I can get right down inside to do any maintenance that needs doing, and the metal will hold this nice and tight against the riser, so if I'm sweeping it out I'm not going to be damaging the insulation at all. That's one reason. Now the early mass heaters that were built, they quite often used metal inside the riser. So they'd have, the riser would be the metal, then there'd be an insulation layer and then metal around that. But the central bit of the riser gets so hot that it just failed. You know, now I think if you, the very early ones that were more cobbled together and they sort of worked and so on, you know, it was a slow evolution of the technology. Didn't get as hot as they do now, so that's possibly a reason that some people have still got the perception that metal inside the riser works, but apparently it's a big no-no these days, so I'm not even trying it. But outside, because once the gases come up and they hit the top of the barrel, shed a load of heat and then flow down between the riser, or the insulated riser, and the barrel itself that will be on here, they've cooled off a lot, and at those temperatures it's absolutely fine. It's not going to damage the galvanizing at all. So yeah, we'll bit by bit we'll put the insulation on, we'll wrap it with wire, and then we'll come around again and we'll do it with metal, and we'll wrap that with wire again to hold the metal in place, and it should last a really long time. It's a fairly dry, non-corrosive environment actually, once we're out of the burn tunnel here, because there's no creosote, there's none of the acids, there's none of the really corrosive stuff that you normally get with burning wood. Just doesn't happen in this because it's all burned off as fuel, so things last a really long time. Right, let's get started. So that's the riser insulated, roughly. See, I've come up a little bit. Once I got it all snugged in, I'll come around and I might tuck that down a little bit, and you know, I'll trim off a little bit if necessary. But you can see it's really basic, just wire wound around it just to hold the insulation in place. Because next is I'm going to encase it in this stuff, and if I was trying to hold all that in place while doing that, and it's easily cut with scissors and stuff, it's pretty easy to work, but it is also, you know, fairly fragile. You see it tears apart quite easily. So that's why we're protecting it, but also trying to hold that in place while wrapping it with the mesh would be really difficult, you know, without nudging the riser anyway. So yep, that's the next job, is to get the mesh on that. That's the cage onto the riser. So you can see that I've wrapped it in the mesh, and then I've used wire twists around it in a few places just to hold it all in place. And then when it's all put in, I just put the pliers on and just give it a kink, and it just tightens the whole thing up, because you don't want to tighten down too much on the brick, because don't forget they're just held together with clay. There's no mortar involved. But yeah, I managed to do that without giving it a single bump, so that's good. I'm pleased with that. Now I'm going to use a bit of the leftover material, cut to size, to just fit on the top of the burn tunnel, and down the sides here there's a little lip, so that'll fit quite nicely, and use that to wrap the top of the burn tunnel. And then the rest of it I'm going to use rock wool for, because it's not quite so critical. But yeah, that's the next bit. So the last bit of the ceramic, I've cut it down to size, and I've cut little notches out just so that it'll fit really nicely into this little recess that was just because of the way it was constructed. And the little bits that got cut out here have been used to just tuck in here into the end, so it's worked really nicely. Looks almost like it's been iced, doesn't it? It's really cool. So the next step is to get rock wool, and we'll wrap the rest of it up to this kind of height. I don't want to come any higher. I could just pile more insulation on, but when the manifold comes through, I want to be able to put a good thickness of material through here for the barrel to rest on, and I don't have to cut any brick. So I'm going to leave that at the size it is, at the height it is, and we're just going to wrap everything in mesh, and yeah, that'll be the insulation done. So that's the rock wool cut to size, and you can see that where I've got little projections, I've cut little sockets so that it will fit neatly against that, and it'll snug down nice and neatly. It just makes it a much easier surface to get the mesh around and then later the cob onto as well. So that's it, completely finished and insulated. That's a decent thickness of insulation, and it's got wire cage all the way around it just to contain it while I do the cob around it. But that's in a little while. That first things first, I need to get the barrel fully prepared and get that ready for mounting, and I need to build the manifold, which is why I've got this ring out. Right, so it's time to repair the barrel. Now what I could do is just flip this barrel upside down straight over the riser, so that that bottom section would be at the top, and that would give me you know, a riser that would work really well, and then just cob around the base of it, and it'd be lovely and it'd be fantastic. Away we go. But the trouble is, when it comes time to service it, I'd have to chisel the cob out, lift the barrel off, do all the hoovering inside that, and all the vacuuming I need to do, and then put the barrel back on and re-cob. I want to avoid that. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the bottom out, so where the barrel will go on this way up, and then we'll put the lid on, and we'll put a little strip of stove gasket down into that bit there, just, you know, little section down in there, fairly minimal gasket. Put that on, and then we'll put the band clamp on, and that'll snug it all down nice and sealed. And it means that when it comes through to maintenance every year, all I've got to do is undo the band clamp, flip the lid off really easily, give it all a vacuum out, and I'm done with the riser section much quicker. And it also means that when I burn this, because I've got to have a really hot fire in this, because if I just put this in the house and started using it, half of the you know, the top half getting really hot would burn off the paint, and it'd look really horrible, and it'd you know, fill the house with all sorts of unpleasant fumes from the burning off of the paint. I want to avoid that. So what I'm going to do instead is we're going to burn it in situ, and it'll take all the paint off, and then we can just come through, wire brush it all off, and then when it's on the heater and running and really hot, we'll just wipe oil over it, and that'll polymerize onto the surface, a bit like you know, seasoning a cast iron pan, and you know, it'll be good as, and it'll last for a very long time. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this barrel over. Now to take the base out, I'm going to use this saw here with a metal blade on it. What I'm going to do for that, because of course getting that through the steel, you know, it's just not going to happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the drill and chain drill a little slot, just so I can get the blade in, and then I can start cutting. Now I don't know quite how I'm going to do this. I'm going to try and get it as close to the thing, close to the edge as possible. I was going to leave a little lip all the way around the inside, but to be honest, I think that this is so strong, I just don't need that reinforcement. So yeah, I'm going to cut it as close to the line as I can, all the way around. And yeah, I've got all the safety gear, ear defenders, because this is going to be really loud. It's going to act like a drum as soon as I start cutting it. We'll see how that goes. So that went quite well. it's now a hollow tube. See, there's the top, well, the bottom. And that's just where I took the drill in just to make a few, and then I started the cut. And yeah, that worked really well with the metal blade. Now I'm going to use just a file, and I'm going to go around the edge and just take off the last little burr that's there, because otherwise every time I go to pick it up I'm bound to cut myself, and I'll shred in my hands by the time I get it fitted. So once I got that done, I'm going to take it up onto the field, and we'll get a fire going in it and get that done too. So that's the barrel lit. That's the ends of the joists that I removed from the floor, and some old pallet wood that I had knocking around, and some scrap bits of ply, just offcuts from jobs. And then I've just used a little bit of seasoned pine in this core of it just to get it all burning. But once that's properly in flames, the flames will come right up. I've put it up on a few stone just to let air in underneath, and that's it. We just let that burn and take the paint off. So you can see that at the bottom there is actually glowing red. When I came out a little while back, the whole barrel was that colour. So what I've done is I've put a little bit of wood in just to keep it open, and then I've put on the top just to burn off the galvanising, because again, that is going to get pretty hot once it's going. So once that's done its bit, I'll knock that off and just leave that, because I don't want to get too much heat into that. In fact, it looks like it's getting there now. And then I'll take that bit of wood off and we'll just let it burn out and call that good. So there's the barrel. You can see there is no hint of paint anywhere on it. You can see where even the label was. That's down to bare metal under a very, very, very thin coating of rust. And that's because it rained yesterday, and I didn't fetch it in because it's not going to come to any harm overnight. So the next thing is to get a rotary wire brush onto it and just give it all a once over, and yep, then it's ready for use. And I also need to get the barrel lid as well. So here we go. So it's got a little bit of warping to it, but that's not bad at all. And once it's clamped down on top, that'll be fine. So right, next step. So I've got a basic wire brush in a drill. You could do this with a hand wire brush, it would just take a little bit longer, but I've got it, so I'm going to use it in a cheap drill that we don't use much anymore. And yeah, let's give it a go. So that's got the surface rust off the whole thing. I mean, I could take it all the way down to base metal there so the whole thing's really shiny, but it's not necessary. It's all going to have a baked on coating of oil before I'm finished. I'm going to take it into the house today, so it's not going to get wet, it's not going to get rusty, but because I am concerned that we've got a lot of, it's not a heated house at the moment, we're still in the process of constructing the mass heater, and because we've got a lot of cob drying off and things like that, and earth and masonries and stuff, it's a slightly damp house, and I don't want to get any more rust on this, so I'm going to oil it now. This is extra virgin olive oil. How posh is that? But it's not going to bake on, of course, until I run it. This is just to protect the surface a little bit while it's sitting around in the house. So let's put this. I'm going to give it all just a very light coating all over, just to protect it a bit. And even when I'm finished, these bits of kitchen roll that are soaked in oil, they're not going to go to waste, they'll go in the bin even. These are going to be used for fire lighting. So that's the barrel ready to go into the house. It's still going to need burning in, and it'll bake on the oil layer like it would with a cast iron pan, and I need to do the same thing with the top, but that's not going to rust, at least. That's a lot easier. I'll need to run a little bead of stove gasket around the top and put the lid on, and then put the band clamp on, and that'll hold everything good and solid together. But I'm going to do that at the time that I actually fit it onto the manifold itself. So yep, that's the barrel done. Today I'm making a sand and clay mortar for going into the mass heater, and there's not much on it online, so I thought I'd film this stage as well. What I got in here is just a high clay subsoil. It's predominantly clay, there's not much silt in it, and there's bits of gravel and stuff all mixed in with it as well. And I've put enough water into the mixer to cover that up. It's can see here, it's been soaking for a few days, so it's nicely softened, but you know, that is pretty much clay with just a little bit of gravel binding it together. So the first thing I'm going to do is switch this on and give it a really good churn and get as much clay as I can mixed into the water. So that's been churning for 4 or 5 minutes, not for very long. Next step, I'm going to get this sieve, which is not particularly coarse. It's what, about, I don't know, 4 mil, 3-4 mil across. And I'm going to pour the liquid component out of here through the sieve into the bucket. You can see here, that's just predominantly gravel. There's a little bit of clay left, but it's mostly just gravel. So I can get rid of that and then do the next load. It really doesn't matter if I spill much, you know, it's just soil that's been put through the cement mixer. It's effectively free, and it doesn't even take that long to prepare. So then we're getting into the bigger, chunkier stone here, but you can see that's still just stone, so I'm going to get rid of that. So what I'm left with is this stuff here, which is like a good thick cream, almost double cream in consistency. There's a little bit of gravel left in it, but that doesn't matter anyway, because we're making mortar with this. So I'm going to get my wheelbarrow. So I'm going to get rid of everything that's left in the mixer. Because there's still a little bit of gravel and grit in there, so I just want to get rid of all the big stuff. And that's good. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour that clay back into the machine. So I know that that's almost a bucket of clay. Now what I'm going to aim for is a starting point. This is really good quality clay. In fact, just the subsoil here has been used as a mortar between stone on certain buildings. You know, there's not many people, you know, it's not necessary to add sand to it. So I don't really have to worry about having too much clay, because when you've got the wrong type of clay, it can crack when it starts to dry. This doesn't do that. We're very lucky in the clay that we've got on the site. So what I'm going to do is just going to add enough sand to this to make it really nice and thick. That'll make, you know, a nice mortar that'll hold its own weight, but will also squidge a bit. So really, I'm just going to keep adding clay to it until I get to that point. Ideally, I'd like to start at a starting point of 3 buckets of sand to 1 of clay, but I'm not going to be fixated on that because, you know, the water content might be different between batches and so on. That's basically what I'm looking for. It's really not rocket science with this. It's a lot more forgiving than conventional mortar is. So next thing, I'm going to get a bucket of sand. So that's my first bucket of sand. So we'll put the mixer on. Nice. I'm going to need at least 1 other bucket. That's getting there. It's going to be at least 1 other bucket though. That's good. Whoop. Right, we'll give that a mix. That looks pretty good. So basically what we're making here is really a form of cob, but without any of the fibres in. It doesn't need that sort of lateral support. It's just basically being used to trim out the bricks and make a nice brick stack. Let's have a look at that. You can see that it's a little bit wet still. I want it to hold its weight a little bit better than that. As I say, if I just put 2 stones between that and it dried, it'd be work really, really well. But if I put 3 or 4 courses up, the weight is going to start really pushing that out, and it might throw my levels out. So I'm going to put that back on, and I'm going to put one more. Well, I think we'll start putting it in a bit at a time rather than a whole bucket now, because we're getting it down. We're going to dial it in. So let's give that another mix, let it really mix through thoroughly, and we'll see what sort of consistency we're at, but it should be getting pretty close now. One of the benefits of this type of mortar is I've got a really almost unlimited working time. So if I'm halfway through the job and I just get tired or something else happens and I have to leave it, it can just sit in the wheelbarrow. It's not going to harden up, it's not going to cause me any problems at all. But let's have a look. What it could do is dry out a bit, but I can just put that back in. That's still a little bit wet, but I think that's mostly because it needs a bit more mixing maybe. Let's have a look, let's get a piece from another area. No, that's still quite wet. So we'll switch it back on and we'll add a bit more sand. Okay, that's about 2/3 of a bucket there. Just want to go a little bit at a time. I've got more clay, but I'd rather just make this batch and see how we go. Because you can see it's a really fast way of processing clay in bulk. It's really not a big deal. But at this stage we can even make this in large batches and set it aside and come back to it in a couple of weeks. But once we put the straw or the fibre components into it, that can rot out if it's left wet, but it's not an issue when it's in this stage. Let's have a look. And that's another benefit, of course. I wouldn't be doing this with my bare hands with a cement-based mortar. I mean, I do, but it's not good for the skin. It's really quite unpleasant. That is pretty good at that point. If I give it a wobble, you can see how much movement we've got in it. But if I put that straight on my hand and I apply downward pressure, that holds pretty still. So I'm going to give the wheelbarrow a quick rinse because it's still got a little bit of gravel in it, and then I'm going to dump that into the barrow, and I'm going to take that into the house and start building with it. So the next bit I'm working on is the manifold. Now the manifold's one of those things that apparently people struggle with quite a bit, which is why a lot of people just make one out of a second barrel. I want to avoid that because obviously a barrel is something we have to buy new and have shipped and so on. Whereas brick and and mortars I can buy locally or make my own. So it's the section that goes basically around and underneath the barrel. So if the barrel fits over the top and the bottom edge of the barrel is pretty much where this ring is here, this isn't going to be here, that's going to be on the top of it, but let's just give myself a bit of a template. It's as the gases go down through the wood feed where the fire is, burns goes to the bottom of the burn tunnel and then come up the riser, the barrel over here, the gases hit the top of the barrel, which heats up, gives you immediate heat, sheds all that heat, and then the gases drop down between the riser and the barrel skin into this space down here at the bottom. It's more like kind of like a horseshoe kind of shape, and then flow out, down and out through the ducting and go around the bench. Now there's a few things to bear in mind with it. It needs to have, same as everything else with the cross-sectional area, through the burn feed and up through the riser and through the ducting, all being the same. The only exception to that is this space here, this circular donut shaped space that runs down between the barrel and the riser. As it gets down to the bottom, you need to be very careful to avoid bottlenecks, so I need to have a minimum of 4 inches gap between, again this is all in the book, 4 inches gap between the manifold and the insulation that's around the riser. Here I've got about 7-8 inches, which is huge, it's brilliant. And to be honest, it's more than I'd expected. Now, these earthen masonries are really forgiving, so you can see that it's still pretty wet now, even though it was set up last night. I made a big load of it still in the wheelbarrow, and that's still fine. I could use that for days from now. And even if it went dry completely, I could just wet it and keep using it. It's really forgiving stuff. So I just started playing around last night really. It was a bit dark for filming, but it's getting a bit dark now. But I set up the bottom half of it just to see how it would go, so basically up to here. And I hit what I thought was a bit of a wall with it. But I've come back today and I think I've worked out a brick. I thought I'd have to bring it in further and reduce that gap a little bit, which as I say is more than I need, but still, a bit more is always good. But I think I've actually got away with it. So I'm going to take all these bricks off down to this level here, which will show pretty much the section that I've done. There's none of this around the back has been done. The bricks have just been stacked up just to hold this ring, which is a bit of a template. It's going to be a slight shift this way with the barrel. There'll be a bit more space this side than the other, but that's fine. It'll just tend to shed more heat in this direction, but that's pretty much what I want anyway, because the bulk of the house is in that direction. The only heat in that direction is a bit that needs to go in for the kitchen. So that's all ideal. I'm not going to have a huge amount of working room around the back there, but that's fine. There shouldn't be too much ash build up down there anyway. And when I come to do my maintenance in future years, I can take this clamp off the top of the barrel, pop the lid off, and because I can get the vacuum down right into here and pick up all the ash, brilliant. And the same here, from this clean out here, I can reach my arm in and actually into the ash pit that's down in the bottom there, which is because this ducting comes in 1 brick high, so there's a little gap at the bottom. That's the ash pit. That takes the fly ash that gets drawn from when you're lighting and things like that. A bit of ash will get drawn through the system, and that will tend to build up in the bottom of the manifold. Well, because we've got that 1 brick high space, it gives me loads of space. I can just reach in, pull the bulk of it out, drop the vacuum down from the top, get the worst of it, and that's it. That's maintenance done for the entire, the whole of this end of it really. So yeah, now I'm going to very carefully start reassembling this in a way that manages to support this ring, because I've got the barrel all good to go, and yeah, I'll do a bit more filming once I've got the manifold itself built. And that is the manifold built. So it's been done with the clay mortar and a few courses of brick. I had to change the kind of brick I was using for that section there, because that's it bridges quite a big gap there, and with using the brick that has, let me show you, that one with these holes in, it's yeah, I've got all sorts of trouble trying to get mortar to fill it with, just dropping straight through. So I've had a fan on it just to dry it out a fair bit, and it's pretty good. I'm quite pleased with the clay mortar. That's worked really well. So the next job will be to prep and mount the barrel. You can see pretty much the shape it's going to take here, where it's going to go. So I'm going to bring it up a couple of inches with a nice thick, well supported cob, and that'll come all the way around to a nice depth. Then we'll put the barrel down onto it and sink it in a little bit just to give a really nice seal around it, and then we'll check the spacing between the barrel top and the top of the riser. Now if I bring it up 2 inches to make, because this brick's slightly thicker as well, so I'll have to bring the whole thing up about a couple of centimetres maybe, which will make the gap at the top ever so slightly too big. So what I'll do then is I'll use some of the fire clay, mix it with a bit of sand to make a little bit of mortar, and I'll put a little tiny centimetre high lip just around the top here to bring it down to 5 centimetre gap between the top of the riser and the top of the barrel. So I've put a 2-inch lip of cob all the way around, and that's a good couple of inches thick, and it's a very fibre rich mix as well, because if I try to do just a clay sand mortar, when I place the weight of the barrel on, it's just going to sink straight into it and it might drop a bit too low. So I've got a nice fibre rich, so it'll give it a little bit of support laterally, so it'll just stay on there. And on the top here I've got 2 of my not quite split bricks. Each of them is 2.5 centimetres thick, 1 inch. So with two of them on top, that gives me a 5 centimetre or 2 inch spacer on top of the riser. So as I put the weight of the barrel down, now it'll probably be proud of this because of the thickness of that layer down there, but it certainly can't get too low and need resetting afterwards. So as long as I place it on this, I'll give it a bit of a tap down to make sure it's, make sure it's good and bedded and flat and level, and then I'm going to leave it, and then I'll measure the gap at the top of it afterwards, and if it's more than 5 centimetres, I can just adjust that by putting a little bit of mortar around the top is to reduce that, rather than have to chase that angle all over the place, so or that height all over the place. So the next thing is to put the barrel on really carefully. You see I've placed the rim down and given it a little bit of a wiggle so that we can see exactly where the lip of the barrel should go. So yeah, hopefully that should work okay. You got it? Right, nice and easy and jolly down. Just give my way a bit. My way a bit.
Yeah.
Right. That looks pretty good, but that's very, very high. So that's actually better than it being too low. Have a little look. Right, so I'll have to bring it this way a touch. Oops.
Oh, well, there's a hole there now.
Yeah, it's pretty snug in 2 places. Is that good there?
I think so.
A tiny crack isn't a massive deal.
Yeah, I think that's all right.
So if you bring the whole
See if you
thing
can see light through it.
this way just a touch. It's going to get
There'll be more to go on.
It's going to get sealing all around the outside of it anyway. It's just to create a lip for it to sit on.
Okay.
And I am happy with that, so I'll just check my levels. I mean, it's high, so I'll definitely have to put a little. That's perfect. I can't hope that it's going to be perfect all the way around. It's perfect.
Nice.
First time perfect out the gate. That's unbelievable. Lovely. So that's it. Perfect. Really pleased with that. I ended up not going with putting the lid on. I wanted to be able to see down it as it was going on, but I can already tell that because the lid dishes in about 1 inch, I'd be very, very close. I might have to bring it up a couple of mil, but it's very, very little in it. So I'm really pleased with that. That is, you can't pick that up on camera probably, but that's a really nice fit all the way around. Now I just need to seal around the outside with a bit more cob, with a bit less fibre in it, and then yeah, we'll put that on to try and get it drying. So that's got the lid on it, so that's all sealed in now. I'll put a few inches of cob all around the outside just to seal it all in really nicely. Obviously this will all have you know, a nice plaster finish and so on eventually. And then I've partially closed off the fuel feed, and I'm blowing a 2 kilowatt fan heater down into it to heat up. Yeah, I can already feel a little bit of heat building up in the top there. So hopefully it'll heat the drum up a little bit and it'll help to dry out some of this cob and stiffen that up. So if I'm right, we should have, yay, there's a bit of heat coming out there, but not much. So it goes to show just how much is being absorbed by all of this currently, because of course 2000 watts of electrical power is nothing like the sort of power that's going to be going through that just with a handful of sticks once it's running. So yeah, that's it. That is the barrel fitted. Last night I went through the chimney breast and it's worked really well. Let's see if I can get a bit closer. So you can see inside there, there's a ceramic liner inside the chimney itself. So that's very, very good news. I've just jammed insulation, that's the wispy bits you can see around the edge. I just jammed insulation in just to seal around that pipe, and then I'm going to make good with some nice masonry afterwards. But if you watch the one about, you know, the ground prep and getting the foundation done, that video, you'll know that the boiler has had to stay in place because this entire chimney breast had so much messing around with it lower down that it was becoming unstable, and I really wasn't comfortable taking any more out. At the time, I said that I was gonna, when I went through the chimney breast with a nice big hole, I was going to pour liquid cement down there and fill the entire back boiler, all the voids in it, with concrete and make the entire bottom section of this completely solid. We are now at that point because today I'm going to put the extra clay stabilised perlite and the cob coming through here, and it'll be very difficult to get onto that hole when I can't walk on that section there. I mean, I could get in from that side, but it's still really awkward. So the next job is to get a really nice wet sloppy mix of concrete made up, and I'm going to pour that down that hole. Now to get, I've made a fairly wet mix of concrete. Now to get that down that hole using a trowel or anything else like that, it's going to cause an awful mess. I'd have to sheet everything out and all the rest of it. So instead, I'm using this. I've just sawn the bottom off a bottle, and I just literally scoop a load in. See, it's fairly liquid, and then I just put that in the hole and dump it, and that's it, it's all gone. So I'm going to keep going with that until I've gone through the whole wheelbarrow load, and that should probably be enough. There's, you know, not much space down here, and it should have filled it up to about this level, I'd estimate. It's not going to come all the way up to here, and that's okay. But it also means that when I'm doing servicing of a drop air thing, it's going to be sitting on a little slab of cement. Concrete, rather than having to, you know, worry about it being, you know, down here in the heat exchanger and so on. So there's a lot of reasons for getting it done, but mostly it's about stabilising this. And that's that done. The pipe that's in there isn't permanent. That's just a short section, about a foot or so, that I've got for elsewhere in the ducting. But I've put a fairly wet, well, first off I got a wet render mix, and I just basically skimmed the entire inside of the hole there, so that's completely sealed and no capacity for leak outside of the chimney lining. So that is now a single pipe running through, and then I put a little bed of a nice wet mix on the bottom there, and I've just bedded that pipe down into it because it's got the same profile as the 90-degree pipe that will go on here. So that'll stay there until tomorrow as that sets up, and I've just shoved a rag into it just to keep it, you know, so it's not got a huge draft going through the chimney. But you can actually, if you put your hand against it, you can actually feel the draw through that chimney. It's amazing. So yeah, this rocket should run pretty well, even without a huge amount of priming. So that's that done. So with the core completed and the barrel in all place, that's all pretty much ready to run, other than cobbing around it. But the next stage is to do the cob bench, the mass bench. But unfortunately this is going to have to be done in a few different stages, because behind this wall is the bathroom, and I want to get some of the heat into the bathroom because it's always a really cold room in this house, so you know, it's nice having a warm bathroom. So what I'm going to do basically is cut a big hole in this wall and expose the bench into the bathroom. But of course, this being a really old, complicated house, it's not going to be quite that simple. So first things first, I'm going to have to take off the last of the socket hardware. That'll be pretty straightforward. Then I'm going to have to cut the hole to roughly the size I want. Now the bathroom does extend the full length of this wall, but I'm only going to bring about as far as here, because we're going to remodel the bathroom eventually, and the bath and shower is going to be behind this, and it'll just massively complicate it if I'm, you know, going to have another layer of complexity with the back of the bench exposed. So I'm bringing it as far as here. The bench is going to come up to 16 inches, but that's from here, and that's the standard height of a sofa that's going to be comfortable to sit on, 15-16 inches. So that'll probably be up to about here or so. So I'm going to have to, I could just cut these out and just, you know, put a frame in, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to get some of this, pretty much the same material, cut these sections at a, this is 45mm thick. So I'm going to, if that's the size of the hole I want, I'm going to bring it up 45mm and cut there, so I can put a horizontal across and give a little bit of support to these, and then I'll put uprights butting up against that underneath to act like a wedge and really hold all that in place. Other complicating factors are there's a skirting board down here, so I'm going to have to cut through a section of that because I want to get as much of that exposed as I can, rather than bring it up the little depth of the skirting board. And this end there's the door frame as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut through the skirting board the other side. I'm not going to film that, the bathroom looks awful, much of a building site as this room does. And so I'll cut through the skirting board and take that off, and then I'll drill a hole from this side at the edge of the door frame so I don't cut too far when the time comes. And then I'll just cut these out and then take them out. I'm hoping with a bit of sideways pressure at that point they'll come out pretty easily, and then cut the hole, because I need to do all of that before I start work on the back wall of it, because up to here it doesn't matter at all. I could just use cob, but I'm not going to. I've got more brick than I actually needed. I overestimated how many we need, so I'm going to use that brick to build a low wall. And also, because this is going to be heated bench, I'm going to put a layer of insulation behind it to bring it up so that I'm not putting too much heat into this timber work here. This side I'm going to leave it about an inch or so gap between the woodwork and the mass, and then from the other side, when it's all finished, I'll just tuck some loose insulation into the gap that'll be out of sight, but we'll still seal that off quite nicely, but still protect the woodwork from the bench. And another potential thing, of course, is I need to put the insulation down onto this before I build the wall on top. So I've got a couple of bags of clay stabilised perlite good to go, and the other issue, that'll go down up to about this sort of height, just a few inches, doesn't need a massive amount. And then I'm going to use structural cob, which is this kind of stuff that's got the straw in it, good and strong, and bring it up to this height, because there's no point wasting really nice attractive stone for the facade in an area that's never going to be seen. So in fact I'll probably bring it up to this height so I can get a nice solid base to work on, because it'd be really difficult if I put all the pipes in, which I'm itching to do, because if I just do all the pipes in I can run it. But if I put the pipes in, building this wall, stepping over and around the pipes is going to be really difficult. I mean, knocking against them and so on. So I'm going to do it in sections. And the other issue is I actually have had to order 2 new sections of pipe, because it's a slightly different layout from when I originally started planning this. I haven't quite got the right sort of pipe, so I can't actually go through the chimney breast until they arrive. So again, I'm on stop with that, but I want to get as much of this in as possible before they arrive, which will be next week. So yeah, first things first, I'm gonna make the hole first. So there's the cutout through to the bathroom. So the mass wall will be built against the back of that with a slight gap, and then insulated around, and that'll have a nice wooden frame on the other side of that wall. And we'll be able to hang towels and things on, higher up on that wall, and we'll have a nice warm bathroom. So progress with the bench. I've built this section out of brick to keep it really snug against that wall, because there's going to be a duct coming through here, and I've put some rock wool behind it to act as insulation between that and the stud work behind. But this side of it, where it's visible through to the bathroom, the bit that's going to be exposed for the bathroom heater, I've made it out of really nice stone, but that'll be visible from the other side eventually. And yeah, this bit is the only section that hasn't been mortared in yet, because I only found that the other day to fill that gap. And it does actually key in here, the slab that runs underneath this stone here keys into that brick wall, so it is going up reasonably keyed in together, so the whole lot isn't destabilised. I've had to put quite a bit of mortar cob against the back of it just to support the rocks, because of course they got the flat face is facing the bathroom in there, but underneath of course there are all sorts of shapes, so I've had to use cob underneath it, and that's been left a day or so, and that's really stiffened up. That could be built on top of now and bring it up to bench height, but I'm not going to. The next job I'm going to do is I'm going to use stabilised clay perlite on the floor and fill in this section here and get that completed. That's going to be really nice to get done. Then I'm going to probably pour a little bit of just like a thermal cob, so no no fibre in that at all. It'll just be clay and a little bit of sand just to bring that bottom section, and then I'm going to put rocks on top of that and space that up to basically the bottom height of that pipe there, because that's the absolute lowest point that the pipe is going to take, because it's going to be a very slight uphill here, maybe 1/4 of an inch, you know, maybe 4, 5, 10 mil across its entire length. It'll go, you know, little jog that way, all the way back up, and that again will come up very slightly, a tiny amount. So yeah, nothing's going to be lower than the height of that pipe, so I can actually build up to that point now. And I want to get this front wall starting, because tomorrow the last piece of pipe arrives, and because I'm ready to go through the chimney breast with it now, I can actually get the pipe all in, and with a couple of very small additions to the barrel and that area, I can actually light this thing for the first time. That'll be amazing. So this morning I put off the actual pipe to where that's going to go, so you can see how close it is to the barrel, so that's going to be really good. Now I'm trying to set that bottom angle there, so I'll put this pipe on just as a temporary solution, just so I can move it about more easily, and yeah, set the angle of that 90° there, because that's going to come out to here, and then there'll be a 45 in here, 45° angle that'll send it down that way. So obviously this pipe, if it was left in, it'd be colliding with the pipe running out in that direction. So it's only a temporary fix. But while I was here, now bearing in mind that all around that you can see there's quite a significant amount of gap all around that, but still, and it's only a moderately breezy day today. Look at this. You can see the draw up the chimney, and that's without any heat, anything at all. It's just, you can see, whichever way around I put it, it's just drawing that right up. And this is a fairly small piece of paper, it's, you know, thinner than my finger, and you can see the amount of drag on it, the amount of suction on it, just pulling that straight up there. So yeah, I think a mass heater the first time it's lit is notoriously difficult, because it's got, you know, a cold mass, or in our case there'll probably be a certain amount of exposed pipe still, and it's very difficult to light. Apparently I don't think we're going to struggle with this, because you can really feel the draw through that, and as that gets sealed in more up the top there, that's only going to increase. And once we've got the pipes on, of course, that's going to be drawing through there, through the whole system, and drawing through that hole there. Yeah, that is amazing. I'm really impressed. Now I have changed the layout slightly. Now in the event of moisture running down the pipe, I've got the male pipe, the narrower pipe, running into the female pipe socket, so that if there was any condensation inside the pipe, rather than dribbling out the join, it'll run down inside the pipe and through the whole system. But I've done the same thing at this end, running in this direction, so that, yeah, in fact, by following that orientation, I could run it all the way around the bench and into here, and it'd work, because this pipe fits inside that, so I could run the whole lot the way around. But one of the difficulties I've had is if I use right, I'll show you on the tees, actually, that's the easiest thing to do. So on the clean out tee, and there's going to be 2 of these side by side on the end here, so that I've got really good clean out access for both runs of pipe, both this one up here and the next one running up. But these tees have got, the cap fits beautifully on that, because that's the, you know, that socket fits, you know, sorry, the cap fits on the narrower section of pipe, which has been manufactured to fit in there. But this wouldn't work. I couldn't get the cap onto this, because that would need to be a male section of pipe and have to be slightly narrower. Now, my original plan was to just use a pipe crimping tool, one of them, to crimp the other end of one of these, so I could just swap the cap over and put it on there. But when I've tried that, in fact I'll show you where I've done it. I've got it on here, and it kind of works, and it's fine if I've got a joint inside the middle of the mass that's got tape wrapped around it, and then, you know, a couple of ton of cob. It's absolutely fine, you know, it will fit in and give you a nice locating joint. But if I was to try and put the cap on that, even with a stove gasket, it still doesn't give me a really nice clean fit. So rather than potentially have problems further down the line with, you know, air leaking into it, it's never going to leak out, because this, you know, all draws the whole time. If there was a leak, it would be sucked in rather than gases being spread out into the room. But to make these caps better to fit, I'm going to do a T that way, and there'll probably be a small run of pipe, just a couple of inches long between them, and there'll be a cap that end. So they're really nice fitting. They probably won't even need stove gaskets, but it does mean that I've got to connect this onto this, which is female to female, which creates a problem for making a really good seal. So instead of cutting it here, which is where I need it, sorry, I'll rephrase that, instead of cutting it there, which is pretty much the pipe, where I want that to fit, I'm doing it here. So it'll give me just a couple of centimeters on the end of this that I can use the pipe crimper to do the same as I have on that section of pipe there, and then I can tape that and seal all that in with cob, and it means that I've got really nice clean out caps with really good tight fitting seals on both of these ends, which will just make a lot less, a lot of stress out of it and give me a much better job. So for the sake of one little manipulation here to rearrange these a little bit, no big deal. The other thing I'm going to have to do is manufacture a pipe to bridge this. I haven't bought one. I'm going to show you can get adapters to do it, but I can just use the section I've cut off, cut it down a little bit further, crimp both ends, and they'll fit together, tape together. So it's all a little bit fiddly, but we're actually on the home stretch, and I'm hoping to get this thing lit tonight. So the mass heater still isn't finished at this point, and we've just had Storm Arwen. There's a couple of breezy days before that and torrential rain, and then we had the storm itself, which was pretty severe in the Highlands. We had locally, we had 60-65 mile-an-hour gusts for good 36 hours. There have been trees down and so on away to the south in Aberdeenshire. They were experiencing 90 mile-an-hour gusts. They've still lost loads of power. It was a major storm. It was a big one. Now, at the point that the storm was imminent, we're still waiting on a piece of ducting to finish the entire run so I can get it all sealed in and start it. But as it was already, because a house has to breathe, and we'd had the chimney blocked up already, and a house needs heat at this time of year, you end up with condensation on the windows and the walls, and your clothing starts to smell musty, paper starts to wrinkle. It's actually damaging your possessions and the fabric of the house itself. So we made an executive decision and we improvised. So it's this section here that I'm waiting on a 45-degree bit of ducting. It was due 3 days ago and still hasn't arrived. So instead we basically laid out the ducting, and really this pipe here isn't its final position and so on, but we've managed to get the angles working. I spliced in there a little bit of offcut from, I think, this pipe here. Literally everything's at the maximum capacity, just about to get it all work. We taped up all the really leaky joints. That is 3 layers of aluminium tape, nothing else. There's nothing solid inside there, it's just aluminium tape. And there's quite a gap, probably a good, 4 inches, maybe 5 inches down in there. It's a significant gap. These joins here aren't even taped up. You can see there's a few that aren't. In fact, this wasn't even taped up the first night that we ran it. Up the top here, again, that join isn't taped, and around the hole itself, of course, couldn't do much there because this still needs to be moved and adjusted as it's being fitted. I jammed loose insulation around it just to restrict that flow a little. Now, strictly speaking, there's always the concern of carbon monoxide poisoning. So we had a carbon monoxide monitor, so we couldn't, not just something that goes off when it becomes dangerous, something that actually showed us the level of carbon monoxide in the room. We burnt this as is, and I mean, there will be leaks all over the place, where, there's potential for seepage. I mean, there's so many joins that aren't sealed well, and the entire time the carbon monoxide in the entire space just remained steady at 0. Not even a hint of carbon monoxide, so no risk whatsoever. Also, another thing we found was, obviously the burn running and doing all its thing, the amount of air flowing down here. Normally you'd want to restrict it about that much maybe when it's burning, so you get a really good flow and a really good rocket. To get it so that it wasn't sucking the flames off the fuel itself, we had it restricted to that all of the time. More importantly, and more alarmingly, I was really shocked, this thing. This is a damper. Most experts will tell you never fit a damper to a rocket mass heater, because if it's in the closed position, and that's got a flap inside it that completely twists, you know, when it's across, it obstructs it. It's got maybe that much all around it, so it's not a complete seal. But this was put in mostly so that at the time that the fire in the box goes out, we close the bricks completely, and that stops air from flowing down through the system, because if you've still got air flowing through the ducts, you're going to be losing a little bit of heat from the mass. It's not a huge amount, and it's so efficient it's not really an issue. That's why most people don't bother with them. But I decided to fit the damper to close off the flue pretty much, because the little bit around the edge, there's very little flow through that anyway, because you've got, you know, laminar flow effect and things like that. It's not like an open pipe where a certain amount of air would still be, you know, just heat would just be forcing its way up and sucking it in at the same time. If you've got a very small amount of gap around it, very little of that happens. So it effectively shuts that off. To keep this thing, just to stop from just roaring itself, I mean, just ridiculous amount, we kept that damper through the height of the storm, the really peak bit of the storm, when we were about, you know, above 40 to 60 miles an hour consistently. This was kept shut the entire time, and just that gap around it, it was still drawing so strongly that this thing was just, I mean, insane. It was roaring. I've never seen anything like it in any rocket mass video I've ever seen. And that, bear in mind, is with this still very porous, this gaps and all sorts, so it had been sucking a certain amount of air, and so only being maybe, I don't know, 80-90% at a guess of the airflow was coming through this pipe, and it was still, even with that choked down, it was still so intense, the draw, that we were having to keep that cracked just that little bit. It was an amazing system. But we were not cold. I mean, even without the mass in, just running this, I mean, that's still warm now, and that fire's been out for half an hour. Just running it without the mass at all, so, I mean, the pipe flue there was still running quite warm. We were losing a lot of heat from the fuel. Not as efficient as it'll be once the mass is in, but it was still running so hot that we got this room up to 22 degrees. And that's, we've never managed, even with keeping a coal fire in for, you know, all day long like we did with this, we never achieved that. And we did use quite a bit of fuel, but that was because it was running the entire time at full bore. So it's nice to just have that option, I suppose. But yeah, I would definitely, in a high wind area like the Highlands, always fit a damper, just because in real storm conditions, it does allow you to burn. You've got to be very cautious with it, though. I wouldn't go away and leave it at all. But this is pretty much a load up with fuel and leave for a while kind of fuel. You know, you can, you know, sit back on the sofa, read a book or whatever while it burns. But it was a bit more hands-on, just because I was having to feed it a lot because of the wind intensity. But it was a very, very unusual situation. There are people that have lived up here for decades were saying it was the worst storm they've ever seen. You know, the winds were extreme. So, yeah. The draw with having the chimney and then that going up to the highest point was just extraordinary. You know, the draw was phenomenal. So, yeah, basically, the conclusion is it's already the best heating system we've ever had. And when you're getting none of the benefits of the efficiency of having the mass release that heat slowly, we're still getting up in the morning and it's warmer than it's ever been before, just because the contents of the room itself have been acting as mass just from the radiant heat from the barrel. I'm blown away. I'm absolutely blown away. And yeah, it was a real trial by fire, running it for the first time in, you know, a pretty substantial storm. But I'm, you know, really confident in this, the ability of this. The only difficulty that we did encounter was entirely my fault. I got really quite rough jamming logs down into it, and I've knocked this fire break here loose. So that'll be the next video, will be the repair of that, and also I'll do a slight modification here. But again, you know, it's not a big deal. If you're capable of building one of these, you're easily capable of doing these repairs. It's not a problem. And I was being very, very rough with it. So yeah, that's the first burn of the mass heater. That's the first review, I suppose, of the mass heater, and it's brilliant. It's the best thing I've ever built. So in the last video I explained about the circumstances of doing the first burn, and that inside of my own fault, I was a bit rough with the fuel feed and I knocked this fire brick here loose. It'll still work, it's still functional, it's not a problem, but I'm going to do this repair before I do any of the construction on it. It's not the best day, I'm still waiting on the part, so I still can't do the cob bench, or that would be the priority. So I'm going to get this done just so I got something done today. Now, the reason it happened is because when this insulation went on, it's thicker than most people would use. It's really, a solid chunk of insulation. And there's two reasons for this particular insulation. One is just so it insulates the entire firebox, and it really reduces the thermal mass that this is trying to heat up. So the fire brick get incredibly hot, and it creates a much more efficient burn, which is one of the main key concepts of the mass heater itself. But the other thing it does is, if we just encase the whole thing in cob, as the fire bricks expand, and the cob being a different material, one is going to expand at a greater rate than the other, and you can get cracking in the casing. Now, one way of doing that is you build it all in one go. If you're an experienced team, you build it all in 1 day, day and a half. The cob's still moist. When you run the first fire through it, everything expands, everything gets hot, and the expansion takes place while the cob is still malleable. So you're basically building your own expansion joint. Another possibility is to run stove gasket along corners and ridges, and that makes a big difference as well, because that's where you tend to get the biggest stress points, and that's where the cracking tends to occur. But the easiest thing to do is surround it in insulation, which gives you the benefit of the insulation, and because you've got, it's very compressible stuff, that gives you that expansion joint. I use this insulation because it's what I'd got, but as I say, it's thicker than most people would use, and it's perfectly fine, it works really well, gives you a really insulated firebox. But it does mean that because there's so much flexibility in this, there's not a lot of sideways support. Now, yesterday we burnt this thing for 16 hours straight, and these bricks up here did actually get hot, but it takes quite a burn for them to get hot to the point it's a problem. So I'm not overly concerned about expansion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this insulation and the steel cage, the mesh cage, just down a few inches. So just down a little ways, cut back the insulation, and then when I do the rest of this cobbing, which is solid, as I bring this cobbing up, that'll come in and it'll surround these, well, not that back brick maybe, but the other 3 bricks, and it'll supply a little bit of sideways support to it all. And because it's going to be warm and it's going to be running while that cob is still moist and still in place, it's just not an issue. I shouldn't get any cracking, and even if I did, having built it, I'm really not concerned about the repair. And here's the thing: I used to watch videos of people that are just jamming fuel into a mass heater churn. I'd be screaming at the YouTube saying be more gentle. Seriously, you're going to damage your heater. Having built it, repairs are a doddle, they really are. And with all of this, it's not being set in like a refractory mortar, it's just fire clay slip. So repairs are really easy. I've got, where is it? That's my lump of fire clay slip and sand for doing gap filling and so on. And I'm just going to put that on top of the barrel and let it cook, let it heat, and it'll dry out, and I can put that on a shelf with the other, bits and pieces for the repair of the system. And I've got the materials I need there. All they need is wetting out a little bit, and they're good to go. So when I do the plastering, I'll make some little thin, that sort of shape of the plaster material, set that aside, let it dry off, and just set it aside so I've got the same material. If I, put a ding in it by dropping something on it or whatever, I can. That's a good noise from the quail. I can set it aside, and it's good there for repairs if I ever need to do them with the same material and the same colour and the same blend. So yeah, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to strip the cage back, and then I'm going to cut the insulation back, and then I'm going to completely reset this brick, and it'll be like there was never a problem. So I cut off the cage. I just trimmed the insulation back roughly. I could have done this so easily, even with the insulation in place. It's really forgiving. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to wet it down. I've got to be fairly sharpish. The entire firebox is still warm. It's not hot. It's totally safe to work on, but it is. Oh, I should put more water. But it is warm. So, and fire brick really drinks water. So with that done, I'm just going to scrape off. Yeah, that's working beautifully. Scrape off the fire clay slip that was already on there. You can see how well that's coming off, really easy. I'm going to do the same thing then with all the faces of the brick, and that's all the prep done, ready for the refit. So I've got this brick here. This is still really quite warm, so I've got the brick that came off here outside cooling off, so it's pretty much approaching zero out there, so it shouldn't take too long, because at the moment, as soon as I put water on it to scrape it off, it's just, you know, evaporating off instantly. So while that's doing that, I'm making some clay slip. So I've got a bag of fire clay, a basic kitchen sieve, and I'm just going to sieve out the smaller stuff. It's fairly coarse. I don't think all fire clay is like this. If you've got really fine fire clay, you don't need to do this. It just makes it a bit simpler. Because if you've got chunks, then you're going to end up with you know, potential high spots and so on. It's going to get difficult getting everything really level. Not that it really matters in this particular course, because it's going back exactly where it was in exactly the same orientation, so I know everything will line up right. But you can see in the bottom of the bucket that this stuff's building up, and it's the finer stuff that'll do a beautiful job. So I'm going to keep going with that until I've got a reasonable amount. Now I could just make a small amount and paint it onto the brick rather than dipping it, but all I'll do if I've got too much is dry it down, and when it's completely dry, stick it in a little bag, label it up as fire clay slip, and I've got some of this already done, ready for future repairs. That's a fair bit collected in the bottom of the bucket, so I'm going to add water and have a look. And I'm not making like a putty, it's meant to be a fairly liquid mix. I'll stop that, so I've got a bit of water left. Give that a stir. Alright, I'm going to get my hand in there now so I can break it up a bit better. But yeah, that's pretty good already. That's pretty soupy. So even though there are still some chunks that are almost approaching putty consistency in the bottom of it, there's not a lot of point in breaking all of that down, because there's enough liquid on the surface of it that I can get a really good coating on the brick. So as soon as that brick's cooled off enough, I'm going to go ahead and fit it. So I'm pretty much good to go. I've got my clay slip made up, I've had my brick, that's gone outside and that's cooled off nicely, and I've soaked this in water for about 10 minutes, because otherwise as soon as I put the clay slip on, it's going to absorb that moisture and it's just going to be you know, it's going to be very difficult to do. I just put that down on carpet, so let's clean that up. So that's pretty much good to go. From the scorch marks and the fact that the clay was on the bottom, I know that that goes into that orientation there. Oh, one thing quick. This system has no moving parts at all. It's part of the whole real benefits of it is there's nothing really to wear out, with one exception. The brick below this one, which is just above, whereas where the fuel feed becomes the burn tunnel, that brick there is subject to a lot of stress. So you've got cold air rushing down it through the fuel feed, and it's got the heat of the burn tunnel as well. So you've got a lot of thermal shock hitting that particular brick, and they can in time crack, you know, but it's a very, very slow process. It'll still work even with it cracked, but eventually, you know, things might get to the point that it starts to work loose. You can see from this just how easy it is, especially with a bit of insulation, so you've got a bit of wriggle room. You can see just how easy it is to replace even that brick that's, you know, 2 courses down, and by the time I put the next course of brick on here, which will be a thin one, that is, you know, 3 courses down. Very, very simple. All this easily disassembles and goes back together again. It's like, you know, Lego stuck with clay. Brilliant. So I've got to get this fitted, so I'm gonna, let's have a look whether it'll actually take clay slip just with the dip. See, that's pretty good, but I'm gonna add a bit more. In fact, where's my scraper? It'll make more sense. So I'm gonna put There's still a bit of gravel in it, but it really doesn't need much. There's the bottom edge. Give that a good coating, that's perfect. And then we've got that edge there. So really, it was only that face there that I had any issues with. So I'm going to give that another bit of a dip again. Right, let's tilt the bucket so I can, that's better. There we go. Double dip everything. So let's get a good coat of clay on. And then I'm gonna see. I've just done that. Have I done that the wrong side? No, that's right. Okay. Second guessing myself there. So I'm just going to put that into place. Let's just check that there's no insulation jammed in. That's it, we're good. So I'm going to put that down into place. And I just need to make sure that the line there is perfectly in line. And that's it, it's repaired. So I'll take a bit of this and I'll work it into the joints just to act as a bit of sealant. I'll scrape off the excess once it's dried off, and I'll get a bit of the slightly thicker stuff like that, and I'll just use that as a kind of grout just where all the joins are. So this hasn't required me calling out any sort of engineer. Nobody got to be COI registered. You can just do it yourself in your own time, at your own pace, for pennies. And that's it. Yep, that's sealed in really nice. See, that's beautiful. That's it. That's that fire brick reset. That's that repair done. Finally, the part I've been waiting on arrived. It took the best part of 2 weeks, but finally I can get the ducting finalised. Now, in the meantime, because obviously I couldn't put cob round any of the pipes because they'd all have to be redone, I did the cobbing around this section. So now, other than a little bit around the back here, all the structural cob around this has been completed. I didn't film any of it because really it's just slapping cob on, and I'm going to be doing enough of that through this section that I'll be able to do a video on how I do that. So there was no great need for it. I don't want to keep repeating myself. So yeah, next job is to disassemble all the pipes that have been put in temporarily and then cut. Right, let me show you. This part needs to go here basically, but not quite in that orientation, because you see those pipes are a bit pinched there. It's a bit wider at the other end and then it gets closer here, so I want to move that pipe that way slightly, which means I've got to scrape a little bit of cob out there, which I knew when I fitted it, but it's easily done. So then that'll get fitted kind of there. And because at this end I just went with what would work. See, that's overhanging. That needs to come back at least a foot, maybe a bit more. So I'll need to cut a section out of one of these long sections of duct, just so that, because you can see that's just been spliced in just to get it working. So the whole pipe will move this way. In fact, both of these pipes will, the whole end will move up. This has already been cut to length, but that's what that section there is the cut off. So this one will need to be cut down, and then that will fit. Actually, that pipe seems pretty decent length really, but we'll see. Actually, if that gets shortened and then moved that way slightly, we'll have to cut a little bit off. But yeah, with that fitting in there, finally I can get my levels and get it with a slight rise all the way up, and with a bit of cob around all that just to hold everything in place. That will start to dry out finally, and then I can get a little bit of cement around there, and I can start thinking about doing the front face. The light isn't great, but that's all in. So there's a gradual rise from there, all through this pipe, around that corner, back up that pipe, through the 45, and then up the vertical chimney. All the caps are where they need to be now. So we've got the two clear outs at the end here, and another one on here. So finally, that's the pipe work in. So I've got a bit of taping to do on all the joints. That shouldn't take too long, and then it's just starting to put cob and I'll use a more of a mortar kind of mix all around the pipes just to get it really packed in around them and filled in between them. And so I don't want to come too far this way until I start on the front face for the stone, but yeah, that is all in. With the delay that we had getting the last part and having to mess around and cobble things together just to get the heater working temporarily, the base load of cob, which is just thermal cob in the centre with a strip of structural cob across the front edge here, so you can see some straw sticking out. It was all beautifully dimpled and textured and perfect, but with having to step over it all so many times, I've basically compacted this front edge here, and you can see it's slumped in a few places. Now I've sprayed it down this morning to make it a bit softer, but you can see that's become a bit unstable just with, you know, me stepping onto the edge so many times. No matter how careful you are, it's bound to happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to chisel just maybe 4 or 5 inches across the front edge here and make a fairly stable flat platform, and then I'm going to use this cob here to build that up back up to its original level, but with a straight face on this edge, because you can see, you know, from there I've got a slope, which means that if I try building with rock here, it's going to tend to try and tip, and if I just bulk up with material here, again that's going to want to slip down because it's a different set of material, it's not consolidated. So I'm not going to take too much off. I'm just going to try and make a little platform just to key it in with, thank you quail, try and key it in with like an L-shaped in profile strip of structural cob to minimise it, because I don't want to be putting my hands into the clay too much today because it's really cold, it's just above freezing, and it's really uncomfortable. So I'll get as much of that off as I think I need, and I'll reserve that material. It can go back in as cob into the main bulk of the bench. But this is the most fiddly bit today. After this, it's into just packing in structural cob, packing in thermal cob, and that's a whole lot easier than what we're doing here. So there's no point filming me just chiseling stuff, so I'll come back and film a bit more after I've got that job done. So I've carved out that little shelf, and then I've splashed the whole lot with clay slip and the pipes, just so that, thank you, so everything will stick to it. And now I'm just going to build a little platform of this stuff, and to stop it slumping too far forward, I'm just using this hawk, and I'm just packing it down onto that shelf. I'll have to make at least one other batch of this. I think it's I had to hack out quite a bit to get down to really good firm material once I'd started, but I pull it up, you can see that now is a nice little front edge, and I'll just bring it up to more or less the same as this floor height, and I'll do that all the way along before I start to build on top of it. That is the centre section, and across the back there, brought pretty much the height at the top of the pipes. Now I'm going to work on the front wall while this is still wet. I'm going to use the stone I've got and some mortar to set up this front wall and backfill in below the pipes to bring it up to more or less the same sort of height, so all of that can dry off together as a single slab. And these are the stones that I've got. Now Caithness stone is lovely slabs, makes really good pavers, but yeah, this is much more attractive for a stone facade. So these are from Sutherland out west, so I've got plenty of them for it, and I've got a bit more there as well, and a few others stashed away at the back of the place as well. So I'm going to try and make a nice interesting front face on it. You can see it's granite with interesting strips of quartz and things like that through, so it should look quite good. There's been a delay of about a month or so. I was working over Christmas, and yeah, it wasn't going to happen. I was working, you know, long hours, and yeah, just with being off the croft all day, it wasn't going to happen. But before Christmas, I managed to get the next row of stone in. So you can see all of that. Now, unlike pointing with conventional cement mortars, that just scrapes off. So when it all squishes out under the stones and so on, that's not a problem. When it's all set up, I can just come through and just scrape it all back nice and neat, and do a little bit of pointing with its still gaps need filling, and call it good. It'll not always look like that. And of course, you can see with this clay and so on run down the front of the stones, they're all going to need really washing down, scrubbing, and bringing it up nice. And at that point, the whole lot will be oiled, and that's when we'll really start to see the colours in the stone like when they were wet outside. At the moment they look fairly plain, but they're actually really pretty stones. So my job for today is first off to make a load of thermal cob, which will just be the clay with just some aggregate in it, and I'll fill in this section here as much as I can because I want to get it up over the pipes, because at the moment, even though it's still by far the best heating system we've ever had, we're not getting the full efficiency. We're still going through quite a bit of wood because of course we're radiating so much heat through the top of the pipes. It's just, yeah, it's radiating into the room instantly rather than giving us the slow heat effect. So I'm going to fill that section in there, and then I'm going to mount another load of cob on top of that to be put on this later, because across the back there is actually the lowest point. You can see the cob is virtually up to the point of the retaining wall there, whereas in the front here I've got an entire stone's height difference apart from that little bit there, because that needed a bit more reinforcing with structural cob last time I worked on it. So yeah, my objective today is to get a load of just rough thermal cob on above the pipes, basically, to start giving me the real benefit of that. And then hopefully before the sun goes down I'll have time enough to set up a new batch of just like a mortar, so I can put another course onto the back of that and then use that mortar with a little bit of fibre added to it just to finish the little bit of structural cob I need to do here and a little bit across the back there, because you can see where I started to fill it up around these. Now these are going to stay exposed, but they will be slightly recessed. So this stone here is still loose. You can see that's been mortared in. I need to put another bed of mortar down, put that rock on, and just bring that up slightly. And then I've got that long stone there to add something like a lintel just to go above here. But it'll be at this kind of level, so it'll be, bringing the whole thing proud of these pipes. So by the time these have got little decorative handles on, little knobs on them, yeah, they're not going to be kicking them walking past and so on. So yeah, it's just, yeah, where there is a little bit of cob on top of the pipes, it gets really warm really fast. So all Christmas I've been burning without the mass in and desperate to get the mass on top of it. So the good news is, of course, that all the cob that's already there is really bone dry already. So my first job is going to have to be to wet all this down with clay slip, just so I can get a good bond and start building it up, which I'm not going to do a huge amount of filming. In a later video I'll show the two types of cob and how we work it out and so on, but I'll show that when the bench is virtually complete. It'll be a lot easier, because at the moment I'm pretty much against the clock trying to get this finished before everything freezes up for deepest part of winter. And at that point, pickaxing clay out of the ground and mixing it and stuff in the driveway is just going to be impossible, because everything will be frozen. So yeah, the race is on really to get it all done to the point that I can get it finished indoors, with the plastering and so on. But I can do that, but I need to get this cob in first. Right, time to crack on. So that's the back wall at its final height. There's a little bit of lower spot here, but that's fine. It's going to have a layer of cob on it yet before the slabs go onto it anyway. So yeah, that back wall there is exactly level with the top of this stone here, which is, virtually perfectly exactly in line with it. And that's the high spot of this in the front here. So this will all need a thin layer of cob just to bring it all up to the same level as the slabs go in. But basically that's the void now ready for putting in the big bulk load of cob that's going to really give us the thermal mass effect and save us a bundle of money. This end around the pipes, I've going to go a slightly different route. So I'm only going to pull the cob about as far as here, and then it'll get stepped up a couple of times. So I've got a fairly small pour to go into the end here to bring that up. But the reason I'm doing that is that's going to have a certain amount of fibre in it, so more like a structural cob, so I can put the armrest up and keep it fairly strong, so it'll be keyed into all of this below, including a section that will go underneath the stone slab that's going to go on here, because obviously I want the armrest to go the other side of that slab. So that's pretty much it now. It's just into digging the last of the cob, getting that all done. That's the main section of slab in and dried off. You can see it's pretty much up to height at the back there. So I've got a big gap there that still has to be done. I'll come to that in a minute. And I've got a section here that's like a little rebated section that runs all the way along here. That's because that's where an armrest is going, and that's the job I'm starting today. But this is going to be on the end of the armrest, so that'll form the nice structural stone bit on the end, just to make it look quite nice. So you can see that pretty much fits down inside that pit. That's all get set on a little bed of cob, but I'm not dealing with this one today. I'm dealing with this end. Now I've put some packing material of just crumpled up paper, and then some just some plastic over the top of the pipes, so I can use formwork to build up the cob here, because the thing is, that's as far as the bench could normally come. Well, I want it to come out further than that, so I'm going to use cob because it's structural. I'm going to bring it out and have a slightly cantilevered arm that'll come out and then up, because I've got the height difference between the pipes and the section that it's come up to there across the back. That's about 7 to 8 inches. So because I've left all of this clear, I can really get this cob section really keyed in underneath that, and especially with the slabs going across here as well. Big stone slabs are going to go on top of this, so all of that will be really keyed into one big section that can cope with being cantilevered out a little bit. It'll still be really keyed into all the rest of it and all the supporting stonework, but because it's all been done as one piece, it'll hold much more strongly. And this section also is going to have fibre in it. It's going to, because all this is just thermal cob, so there's no straw, there's no fibre in it. This section will, because it's the fact it's coming out as far as it is. I'm going to have fibre through it just to give it some tensile strength. You don't usually want to use too much of it because it can be an insulator, and we want this section to absorb as much heat as possible, of course, from the ducting. But it's because it's going to come out a little bit, I'm going to give it that, you know, little bit of fibre. And it'll increase in fibre content as it comes up, because it gets, you know, it'll get thinner towards the top edge here. So yeah, that's the mass heater as far as it's come. I mean, it's pretty well there really. It just needs the armrests going in, which is this next section, then the slabs going on, and then once it's all dried off, the whole lot will need plastering, and then that's quite a big job. But it's pretty much there, and then we're into things like putting, you know, floor trim back and packing insulation, and also of course reskinning that back wall. I've also got a plan in place for doing this whole section of wall here, but we'll come to that when we get into this armrest, because this is the job for today. That's that section pretty much done. You see, it's not quite up to the same height, there's a bit of a height difference there, but that's all ready to be keyed in, ready for the next layer. And this section here, you can see, is actually cantilevered out, so that's supported only by being tied in with the cob into this section here, because that was a big void there, so it should be strong enough. I've just got this support structure just in while it was being built. That'll be coming out at some point, because today I'm going to be putting the next section on to bring it up to the final height that I want. And I've got on this end here, got a porcupine into the wall, so that's got something that it can key into, and that'll give a lot of support for this arm, because it's hasn't got any support directly underneath it. Just these bricks are just stacked just to support this board. That's a bit of formwork. The actual section itself, you can see, is back under here. So that's the stone support, and then this board comes up at a bit of an angle, and then this is just, yeah, a single monolithic piece of cob that goes back into the bench here. So it should be strong enough, but if I build this up any higher, it's going to be, you know, easy to lever and, you know, cause a fracture down here. So it's going to be keyed into this, and I've also put on a nice bit of driftwood onto the end here. It goes all the way up to the ceiling. That's got a nice few bits that I can hang bits off and so on. But also, once this has got the wood cladding that's going onto it, it'll look quite nice. This will just be oiled up after a bit of a sand. But I've also got a couple of screws into the bottom of that, so I can key into that as well. So this entire cob slab will be tied into this bit of wood here, which is also tied into this upright, but also the cob will as well. So by the end of today, that should be done. But it's been a while since I filmed, because I've also done this arm. So you can see that great big stone I wanted to incorporate is in the end here. It doesn't look particularly pretty at the minute because it needs a clean. You can see it's got clay slip and stuff on, but once it's all been washed down and oiled, that'll be fine. And you can see that that's all anchored in across the whole load, and then it comes across, widens out and goes up into that slab there. And I've actually made that a really big solid piece there, just so that I can extract a bit more heat from the upright pipe as it goes up. And I've done a smaller version of that around this side, just in, and I've started coming up. And you see I've left that so I can key into the next section as it comes up, because when I make batches of cob, this is just, you know, where I put the surplus cob currently. I'm not going to finish this section in here with this batch of construction, because this is going to have a whole load of cob construction put into it, and I want to key that into this. That's going to be left unfinished, but from this point on, that's where I'm going to get all the plastering done. So yeah, the bench is really coming together. So after this job today, and I've got that all keyed in, the next job then will be to cut the stone slabs that are going to go onto this section here, and they'll be cantilevered out about 3 inches or so, so you can get your heels under yourself when you're standing up, and that'll be the top slab for this whole bench. And of course, because that'll be tucked up right against that wooden edge there, that gap there will be filled in by, you know, the slab going up tight up against it, which then isolates the lounge from the bathroom again, because at the moment I've still got slabs of foam just up against it to give a bit of privacy in the bathroom, but it's not ideal. And with them boards out then this mass will be heating the bathroom through that gap. But yeah, first things first, got to get this cob done. That's all the cob done. So I've finished this arm here, and then I've also completed this one here. It's been yeah, cantilevered out over the edge. I've still got the support structure in place. I need to take that out, but while it's been drying, I've just left it all in place. It hasn't been doing any supporting for a while. It's just to stop people banging into it while it's still been setting up. And then on this side, I've tied into a really nice piece of driftwood, and again that has got, you know, spikes and screws and stuff to proper key into the cob, and that is, you know, completely anchored in, because don't forget that's where the electrics were originally, was back behind this wall here. So I need to fill in this section here and let the electrics come back here, and then this will give me somewhere that I can hang things like charger cables and things like that. And then yeah, it's a nice bit of driftwood. So next job now is to cut and fit the slab tops. That'll be what we actually sit on, and then the plastering. But first things first, slabs. I finished the bench top. This is really nice. I didn't do much filming with it because really it was just an angle grinder, big slabs of stone, and just working away at it. You know, it wouldn't have been a particularly interesting one. So they've been bedded down in a sand and clay mortar to more or less level. Now, there's stones from all over the place in this bench, but these are Caithness flagstone, and this is an amazing material. It's a sedimentary rock. It lies under all of Caithness, and this particular slab here, you see the slight ripple effect? That's because what I'm actually sitting on here is a 400 million year old lake bed. This was the lake bed of Lake Orcady, and that was, I mean, it was a huge landmass, very dry, but the lowest spot in that huge landmass was a massive lake that stretched from Moray to the south through Caithness, as far north as Shetland, and as far west as Greenland. It was massive. But the deepest section of it was right here under Caithness, well, at level at Caithness. I'm not sure how far down this stuff is, but yeah, Caithness is just underlined with it, and it splits very easily. As the layers built up over time, over, you know, aeons, the pressure and just time consolidated it into this, and apparently it's got a reputation for being a really good frost resistant stone, which isn't true of the stuff that's higher up in the landscape here. I've tried building with that rock and it just crumbles. This stuff's amazing. It was harvested for centuries. It's there's areas in New York and Manhattan are paved with Caithness stone. The Strand in London is paved with, you can't think, it went everywhere. It's amazing stuff. and it's been built with for thousands of years. This is the same kind of stone, exactly the same stone as are used in large parts of Scarab Brae up in Orkney, you know, the Neolithic site. It's, you know, got a very old tradition. Now these slabs were actually like a stone wall that they build in Caithness. It's amazing stuff. I like the fact that everywhere you go in the world, the fences and the hedges are made from whatever material's there. And in Caithness, it's slabs of rock. So these things are laid, one just slightly overlapping the other. So each stone can't fall that way because of the stone behind it, won't let it. And it can't fall that way because of the next stone behind it. So that everything locks in place. It's an amazing, almost like a fencing system. Very efficient use of stone. And these things are set in, you know, really deep. And these were cut down, and you can see how big they are. I mean, just 3 slabs to cover this whole piece. Now, just in terms of comfort, apparently cob, if I'd gone with a cob bench, it is slightly more comfortable to sit on than stone, but I'm never going to be sitting directly on it anyway. It's just going to have, you know, all this is going to be cushion. But yeah, it's really nice to get the slab on. This is really nice. I haven't cleaned it down and, you know, oiled it or anything, so it'll look up not nicer than this yet. But there's no point getting it all clean because I've still got to do all the plastering, and that's going to make a big mess. But at this point, all of the mass is currently, you know, on it now. Other than the little bit of skim on this, and that's negligible. But, you know, the bit over the pipes, you know, a little bit of grout to put in, but really, this is all of the mass. And yeah, it's amazing. This heating system is incredible. But yeah, it's generally, these things are built to be something that you can sit on just as a sofa. We've made something that's obviously bigger than that. I mean, if I put my feet out, and I'm 6 foot, bear in mind, you know, my feet actually don't reach, well, just about reach the end of the slab. So with cushioning on, so you could, you know, have quite a few people, you know, reclining quite comfortable with big cushions behind them and stuff. But also with, you know, minimal structures along the side of it, like a couple of small tables at the right height. This could be a really nice double bed, and of course it's heated from underneath. But because this is such a massive mass, I mean, we could have got away with one that was significantly longer, because of there's a it's in the book. I'm not gonna go into it. You know, if you're going to build one of these, you need the book. So but there is a formula for the length of duct that you can get away with if you're going with the duct system through the bench, and it's significantly longer than this. But because we got constraints of just the space that we had to build in, we had to make it fairly short, and yeah, instead of which we just made it big. But here, very occasionally, we'll get really bad conditions where it'll be significantly below zero and it'll be 40, 50 miles an hour for days at a stretch. When you get days like that, we need to be able to run this thing around the clock, you know, just, you know, well, not at night, but, you know, get up in the morning, light it and run it all day. And it keeps the house, I mean, incredibly warm, which is something that the old heating system just never did, and it cost a fortune to run. But when we've got it running all day, I don't ever want to reach the stage that especially with insulation on, that this bench is getting too hot and it's starting to threaten the, you know, foam or whatever insulation or whatever fabrics we've got as cushions on here. So this every part around the ducts has got at least 12 inches of cob. That can absorb a huge amount of heat and just radiate it out. So, I mean, this ran for a good 4 hours last night. We actually got the lounge up to 24 degrees, just because obviously I'm still, you know, drying in the mortar on there, so we run it a bit longer than usual, which is incredibly warm. That's uncomfortably warm for me. But, yeah, we were trying to get it bedded in and get things to set up. And currently I'm sitting here and I'm feeling gentle heat from underneath. It's really nice. But it's not hot. You know, you wouldn't say that's, you know, even perceptibly warm to the touch, really. It's just, you know, around body temperature, maybe a little bit cooler, but it'll continue to radiate that heat for a couple of days. We'll have another burn tonight as well, of course, and it'll become stupid hot. But we've got a big cold snap coming up this week, so yeah, it'll be nice when there's a foot of snow on the ground to, you know, have this thing running a little bit, but the winds won't be high, so we won't be running it a great deal. But yeah, that is the slabs in place. And it's really nice to actually sit on it properly for the first time. So next will be the plastering, and then I'm into the polishing of it all. But yeah, I thought it was worth filming at this point, just because this has been a huge step for me. I started the plastering yesterday. I'm really quite pleased with this bit here. Still wet. It's dry around there. It's got some things placed around to stop people knocking into this corner, but yeah, I'm really happy with the finish. and really I've learned to do this doing the most complicated shape imaginable, you know, because I've never done this before. So yeah, that's very, very cool. Very pleased with it. I mean, I still got a lot of cleaning to do. You can see all the clay splashed and so on. This edge here, I'm not actually doing this corner just yet, because there's going to be a big sculptural cob element on here, so I want to keep well clear of it, so that when that's done I can just fill in the bit between and have it all blended together, rather than having a really, you know, jarring joint in here kind of thing. So yep, that's the way that's going to happen. So I'm not doing this corner just yet, but the rest of it is all getting finished. Yeah, I'm really pleased with it. Yeah, I got one more process to do on it with sealing it and giving it a good polish up, but I haven't done the other armrest for the other end of the bench from this one yet. So I'm going to do a quick how-to when I do that, so I'll show you that. So experimented a little bit, and this is my recipe for an earthen plaster. So I've got a bucket of clay slip. That's quite liquid, but by clay slip standards it's quite thick. And then equal amount by volume, so a bucket of sand. Okay, good enough. And then I'm going to give that a quick mix. But that's not it finished yet, but just give me a minute. There we go. Right, now, I experimented with this because, you know, I have. If I was just to use this, this would be fine as like a mortar or something like that, you know, where it's not going to be an issue. But anything that's going to be seen, what happens is, because it's only a 50-50 mix, it's very clay rich, which, you know, I'm using because, you know, clay's free for us, so it's stupid to not. But it needs a fibre adding, and what we're using is this stuff. And this is cattail in the US, greater reed mace in the UK. Some people call it bulrush. It's not a bulrush, but you know, it's often called that. And what we're using it for is, as you fluff it up, you can see, wow, just how much of it. There we go. And it just fluffs up so much. So for this whole batch, we're going to, I mean, you can see just the volume that's created. So these seeds can blow all over the place. It's not going to cause a problem unless they get into like a watercourse or something like that. And, you know, every watercourse has already got them anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But we're going to put 2 sticks, 2 seed heads into this batch. And I might even put, oh, that's quite a big one, so I'll call that good with just the 2 of them. And that acts like, I mean, just this ridiculous stuff. Look at it, it's phenomenal. People use it as like an alternative to down in down clothing and stuff. It's been used for all sorts. It's it's just an amazing crop. There's so much stuff you can do with Greater. Right, before that blows away, I'm going to get it mixing again just to get it covered up. There we go. Right, now while that mixes, so the purpose that serves is like rebar in concrete. So even though, I mean, they're tiny little seeds, and when they're mixed in, you can't see it in the surface. I've polished it up and all the rest of it, you can't see it in there. But it creates a really nice wear resistant surface that can withstand, you know, lateral loads really well. So, you know, the odd ding and so on, it'll cope with, because it's going to be a surface finish. And also, if you take like a biscuit of it and snap it, you can actually see the fibres where they connect. It makes a huge amount of difference to the strength, even though there's no strength at all in these seeds. I mean, you know, it's just fluff, you know, there's nothing to it. So it makes a really nice, like if you're doing cob and you want to put a surface finish on that, use really finely chopped straw. It's rather than the big long strand stuff for the surface coat. This is exactly the same, only much more fine, because obviously it's tiny little seeds. And yeah, I've been really impressed with the way that it's worked. So we'll have a look just how it's coming together. I'm going to call that good, I think. And the advantages with this stuff, you've got limitless working time. I mean, you wouldn't want to go too long. Now I've added the fibre. If this sat for too long, that'll just rot out. It does need to be used and dried out relatively quickly. But I mean, it's nothing compared to using any concrete-based or cement-based material, or like a gypsum plaster. It's and when time I've finished, I don't clean the mixer out, because I'm just going to make some more tomorrow anyway, so it doesn't need to. It's not like cement where it'll trash you. You'll trash your cement mixer and leave it in. This stuff, it doesn't matter, because you can just hose it off anyway. So, and you can see the amount of stuff on the floor, because when I wash it out, I just dump it on the ground. And when I'm finished, probably in a few days now, I'll just dig all this, I'll put it elsewhere, and away we go. Because everything that's going in here, it's all from the land itself, apart from the sand. And I think that's from pretty nearby, but I need to find out where, because really, that's the only thing in this whole mix that wasn't from the land itself. So the clay was mined digging a pond anyway. So, we've had that as a byproduct of job I was already doing. The Typha, the Great Reed Mace, that came from the wetland filter that comes from the duck pond. So effectively, the ducks have helped produce our plaster by growing the crop that we need for it. Yeah, it's phenomenal. Really cool stuff. I like this plaster. Right, I'll show you how I put it on. Right, I'm on to the second arm of this mass now. Now, first thing I did was I sprayed it with water, just get it fairly moist, because it's been weeks since this had any moisture in it, so it was really baked on hard. It was like really rock hard, very dry material. So I just sprayed it down with a fairly standard spray bottle, and I find that if I take the nozzle off completely, it gives me just the right sort of jet for soaking it down without eroding it with a direct jet. I mean, you can switch it to mist, but because it's creating back pressure onto it, it takes a lot more to press the trigger at that point, which is fine if you're just watering, wetting a plant down. But when you're trying to get like 2.5 litres or whatever of water onto cob, you're doing a lot of that, and you just wear your hands out. So that takes all of the hard work out of it. It goes on really fast and wets it down. Then I used clay slip, which is just watered down clay that's been screened, so it's like a very loose slurry almost, and I rubbed that all over it just to act like a key. And you can see the difference here. It's still dry around this side, and on the top here is where I've put the key on. And then the next stage is just, I've done this with trowels and all sorts, and what I found the simplest way is just to get a handful of it. There we go. And then just smear it on. And it's a way of getting, I don't want completely straight angles with this. That's the thing, I was trying to get a better angle here, but it's not easy. Right, so again, I've got a handful of it, and just smear it on. You can see that's going on quite nicely, and if I've got a high spot or a gap, I can just do that. And I'm going to keep doing that until I've got this whole thing, or this side and a bit of the top of it anyway, covered. And then I'll let it set up a little bit, and then give it a second coat just after it's dried off a little bit. And at that point, then I'll come through and start giving it a little bit of a polish, but I'll film that when we get to that stage. So that's had a bit of time to set up, so yeah, I'm pleased with that. It's still wet, but it started to firm up. Now, some people do this with a bottle or a hard stone or something along those lines. Something that's hard and shiny, has got a fairly reliable contour. You don't want anything that's got weird shapes to it. What this is a glass puck that's used for holding down the top of like sauerkraut and things like that. They're really expensive things, but this will last me forever doing this. So you see it's still quite rough. It's just as it went on. I'm going to start even, smooth pressure. In fact, this is quite firm, so I could probably get away with. There we go. See, when it's soft, you can't do this because you just make an awful mess of it. But I'm not even using much pressure. All I'm doing is polishing out and evening up, because obviously that's a really smooth surface. Evening up the shape of it, and you can see that this section here is already a lot smoother. And I'm not going to go all the way down because I've got a bit of a fillet as that goes into the stone. So I'll come back and I'll finish that with a different tool. But here we go. See, it's a bit deeper at the bottom here, so I'm digging in a little. So I don't want to do too much of that. So there we go. And if it gets too claggy, I can just dip it in water and it'll bring up more of a shine. But you can see how that's coming along really nicely. So what I'll do when I go to that stage is I'll give it another half an hour or so, and then I'll give it another quick once over just to polish it a little bit further. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing, but on the side and on the back here. I've only done this section because it's easier for filming, because obviously, the house is, still full of furniture and all sorts. So I'll give this a spray down with water. I'll give it clay slip, and the same on the back here. In fact, I'll do it all in one process. And then I'll use more of the plaster because I got more than enough. And I'll put it all around the back here, and then I'll give it a while, give it the first polish, and then the second coat, and then a second polish. And yeah, just keep building up the levels. Because really, I could get away with the trowel here to a degree, but I'm limited then to it being a really flat surface. And this is a hand-finished thing. I'm not really obsessed with making it perfect. But if I've got curves like this, you can't really do that with a trowel because it changes in profile all over it. And around the back here, there's different levels and steps and all sorts. So, yeah, I'd have to spend a lot of money on trowels to try and get a flat surface with all the different shapes that I've got. It's just easier to use. See, I got a bit of a divot in there, so because I got a bit that built up on the edge, I'm just going to use that. And I filled it in, so it even generates its own filler. Sometimes you'll come across a really big dip, and you can't do much with that. Now, what you can do sometimes is give it a bit of a up-on edge so that it's got more of a shape that'll go into a slight depression. Because as long as it's all smooth, I'm happy, and I'm not worried about it being any particular shape. I set that with the cob itself. The earthen plaster that I'm putting on here is just give it that really nice surface finish. I'm really pleased with this. And bear in mind, I've not done this before. This is my first cob project. This is my first earthen plaster project. It's really not that difficult. With things like this, it's just try a few recipes, see what works depending on what clay you've got. And we're lucky here, we don't have a particularly expansive clay, so when it gets wet it doesn't swell up, it just more or less stays the same. So when it dries out it doesn't crack too much. So down in here is where it's deepest, so it's a little bit softer. So I'm going to have to come back in here probably afterwards and finish. And where's my other tool? Hang on, don't move the camera, we'll just be a sec. And the other tool that I'm using is this thing. This thing's been phenomenal. It's crusted up with plaster at the minute, but it's got that nice finishing point on that edge, and it's got like a little trowel tip on that edge. And with that, with it wet, in fact, let's just, you can do very small areas much more easily. And I also use it, I've been digging out pointing on the front edge of it and all sorts. But really, between that and that, that's just about everything I need. And yeah, this will last me the rest of my life, and so will this. It's not bad as, a plasterer's kit goes, is it? Now, if I was doing big areas, I'd probably have, a bit more professional trowel work. But I bought a pair of these in stainless steel, and I started off using them, and they're really good for getting material on, but for finishing it, I still prefer this, even on a flat surface, so you get that, you know, slightly wavered effect. As I say, I don't want like a gypsum plaster quality finish, because it's not, you know, why dumb down to the lowest standard? I don't really want that aesthetic. So yeah, you get the idea. So I'm going to do that all the way around all of this, and then continue to polish it another couple of times as it dries. By then it'll probably be tomorrow morning, so I'll better show you what it looks like in the daylight when it's partially dried up. And then we're going to start with the oil soap seal on it. And yeah, I've not done that either, so that'll be another interesting experiment. But yeah, all right, I'm going to crack on with this. And so there have been a couple of changes with the bath heater since I last filmed. I've finished the plaster work, and I've finished the coating on it, and I've actually started work on some of the wall cladding and bits and pieces. But yeah, it became a bit urgent. We had friends and family coming to stay all at the same time. We needed something to sit on, so I didn't have a chance to film. I just, you know, went straight at it and blasted straight through it. But really, it was variations on a theme what I was previously doing, so I'll just show you what I've done. So at this end, you can see basically I did a second coat of plaster, and then polished that up with the polishing stone, and then I went through and polished it again when I put the olive oil soap polish on. But I'll explain what I did there in a bit. But yeah, you can see that's all round. I still haven't polished down below, that's still raw cob, but you know, that's just pretty much ready to go. And at this end, I'll show you what I've done here. Now you can see it's got a nice sheen to it, it's got a nice mottled effect. Really pleased with it. You see, the only crack I've had really is here, and it's so minor, and it looks, you know, almost like a marbling type effect, so I'm not even worried about it. I'm not going to bother repairing it. I could fairly easily, but yeah, I'm really pleased with this section. It's very smooth. You know, I'm incredibly happy with it. I'm not as happy with it in places like here. You can see there's still low spots, it's a bit rough, and the same up here. There's a few places where I'm not massively impressed with it, and to begin with I was thinking I'm going to hack off the plaster and redo that part of it again. Since then I've calmed down a bit, and I think, do you know what, as it becomes a bit worn, it needs a bit of, you know, touch up and a bit of care anyway. I'll just, you know, do these sections differently, because also this is the first thing of its type I've ever built. So I've never done earthen plaster, never mind doing, you know, this sort of hybrid Tadlac kind of effect. But yeah, I mean, where it was completely smooth and done with a trowel, it's gone really beautifully done. I'm very, very happy with it. I'd use that on a wall with no hesitation at all. It's a really nice effect, and should be pretty much maintenance free. But yeah, around here, for example, where, you know, where the shapes are more complicated, I'd spend more time polishing it smooth and then use this effect. So something to learn, but so I've still got to do a few things with it, but you know, that has really come along, and I've started putting in the that's recycled pallet wood, because I like the look of it. We used some of it on an outbuilding, and I thought actually I'd really like that inside the house. So these have been sanded a little bit more, but basically to create the same effect. And we need to put the cushioning on it still, but this is just to set us on. It's ones that we've, you know, scavenged from an old sofa and all sorts of bits and pieces, just to have something to sit on. But as ever, still really impressed with it. This thing's amazing. So, but yeah, that's where it's going at the minute. The plaster work is done effectively, and I suppose the next video will probably be after I've done, you know, redone the pointing at the front here, just give that its finished effect, cleaned up all of this around the pipe work and so on. Yeah, probably got some better cushions on. Doing a little bit of plaster work around the top there, just because I'm sick of looking at that wall. It's hideous, but that's horrible. Finish paneling that up, at least as far as there. I want to put bottle bricks higher up, but that's going to have to wait. I've got other jobs that are a more urgent job than that, but I want to bring it up high enough that, you know, you can sit and put your head back and so on. You're not going to get insulation in your hair. But as everything else, is always balancing the business against the house and so on. So it's yeah, I'm going to get this finished and stop it for the summer probably. But yeah, it's an amazing thing. Oh, and putting the floor back in, so that'll look a lot nicer. Well, it's a chipboard floor. It's not the best. It will be changed eventually, but you know, it's still going to look a whole lot better than it is now. That's the thing with transitioning to a more natural house over time. You know, it's just a bit at a time as things need to be swapped out anyway. We're using better materials, but everything's a compromise, same as most people. But yep, so that is the next stage of the mass heater completed.